Effie led Nephis, Sunny, Cassia, Kai, and Castor into the next chamber in the maze of tunnels. The giant underground chamber was circular and as immense as the grand hall of the Bright Castle. Its walls were built out of the same gray stone slabs as the mighty walls of the Dark City, but unlike them, the walls of this chamber were covered with whispering streams of cold, nebulous black water. In the center of it, a vast mountain of human bones rose from the ground, reaching almost halfway to the distant ceiling. Thousands, no, hundreds of thousands of people must have perished to create it. With a harrowing realization, Sunny finally understood where the people who built the ancient city and the impregnable wall surrounding it had disappeared. They were all here, piled onto each other in this vile monument of death. This horrid dark chamber was their final resting place. An old memory suddenly surfaced in his mind. Back beneath the branches of the soul tree, Cassia had seen a vision of a blood-soaked hill formed from countless corpses. On top of it, a tiny black seed was floating in a pool of blood. Was there a similar mountain of bones hiding under the soil of the Ashen Barrow? Was that how the Soul Devourer had been born? Sunny shifted his gaze, only now noticing the veins of crimson coral growing from the harrowing hill of white bones, almost like the muscle tissue of some colossal creature. Following the coral pillars up, he finally saw that the dome of the immense chamber was broken, with pale sunlight streaming through the breach and falling on the ghastly visage below. A giant stone hand was reaching down through the broken dome, its palm open as though trying to caress the mountain formed from the bones of those people who had once populated this dark, forsaken land. Looking at the stone hand, Sunny suddenly realized where they were. The vast underground chamber was situated directly underneath the headless statue of the graceful woman who had once saved them from drowning in the black waters of the cursed sea. One of her hands was raised toward the heavens as if trying to embrace them. The other had broken off and fell down thousands of years ago, lying in the mud at the base of the giant statue. Apparently, this second had reached into the depths of hell, and Sunny was looking at it right now, which meant that he was, frankly, in hell. That hand was also their way out of here. Effie's voice snapped Sunny out of his train of thought. "Doofus, wake up!" Brought back to reality by Effie's yell, he shuddered and looked around with a new understanding. He reminded himself that Effie had warned them time was of the essence. The exit the Huntress had told them about was the breach in the dome of the underground chamber. With Kai's aspect ability and the help of the golden rope, escaping through it was not going to be a problem. There was something glaringly unnerving about the scene. Effie had been very clear that some sort of monstrous nightmare creature lived in this chamber, yet Sunny failed to notice anything living in here. Where was this Lord of the Dead that she had mentioned? From Effie's colorful description, Sunny had expected to see a giant monster slumbering in the heart of the catacombs. If memory served, her exact words were, "A big fat bastard of a nightmare creature." Sunny felt his heart beating faster as he began to consider another possibility. His eyes narrowed. At just that moment, the mountain of bones suddenly moved. When the mountain moved, everything started to become more clear. At first, Sunny thought that the unknown creature was sleeping inside the ghastly hill of bones, but then he realized that something even more bizarre was unfolding before his very eyes. The mountain itself was the nightmare creature. This was the Lord of the Dead. Each of the countless bones piled on top of each other in the underground chamber was a part of its body. For a moment, Sunny was paralyzed by fear. He thought, why had Effie called this thing a fat bastard? That is what you call a fat bastard? But then, disparate pieces of information clicked in his mind, assembling into a vivid chain of cause and effect, and he felt foolish for not piecing it all together sooner. The mountain of bones, the horde of immortal skeletons, and the Lord of the Dead were all connected. The nightmare creature in front of him was a fallen tyrant. Tyrants were a fifth step in the evolution of nightmare creatures, and the name of that class was not coincidental. The fifth step represented rule and authority. That's why the blind monstrosity he had faced on the slopes of the Black Mountain was named a king, and that's why the abomination in front of him was named a lord. Classes differed from each other in terms of pure might, but most of the distinction between them was caused by a more fundamental reason. Higher classes possessed characteristics that, while not directly affecting the quantity of their power, gave it a qualitative change. For example, while beasts were mindless, demons and those above them were intelligent. That's why a demon, even if it was only slightly stronger than a monster, was in fact 10 times more dangerous. The characteristic of the tyrant class was that these nightmare creatures were capable of creating and controlling large amounts of lesser creatures. The Mountain King's larva that Sunny had slain during his first trial, which was born when a tiny worm living inside the Mountain King's body entered the corpse of a dying slave, was one example of such a lesser creature. Similarly, while the skeletons that the cohort had faced were awakened, they had to be created by a fallen tyrant. In some sense, Sunny and his friends had been fighting the Lord of the Dead since they first stepped foot in this tunnel. And something told Sunny that those skeletons' immortality was tied to the Lord of the Dead, too. If someone wanted to destroy the undead army, they would have to destroy the abominable bone colossus first. Said colossus, meanwhile, was slowly waking up right in front of Sunny, and if it did, he'd lose any small chance he had at escaping. Damn it! Luckily for Sunny, his friends were far more focused on escaping than he was. He wasn't sure if they were less shocked by the revelations about the true nature of the nightmare creatures in the tunnel, or if they simply had failed to connect the dots. Nervously gripping the midnight shard, Sunny kept an eye on Nephis. The golden rope was already in her hands, and she was passing it to Kai. Before the beautiful archer could take it, though, the mountainous creature suddenly rippled. A moment later, a twisted pillar of bones shot from its body, flying in its direction with the force of a battering ram. The massive pillar of bone rose from the skeletal pile in the center of the room and flew at the group. Nephis and Kai dove away, and the column of bone shot past them. Before the thunderous sound of it crashing against the wall of the chamber even reached Sunny's ears, the pillar was already moving, whipping sideways with tremendous force. Luckily, he and Cassia were out of its path, but Effie and Castor were not. Both of them reacted with admirable speed and fell to the ground, allowing the terrifying limb of the gargantuan creature to fly above their heads. Rising from the stone floor, the huntress looked to her champions.
It's just thrashing in its sleep. Move! We need to get out of here before the bastard wakes up!
Cursing, Sunny dismissed the midnight shard and faced the mountain of bones, trying to predict its next move. He was beginning to understand how Effie's original hunting party had perished in the catacombs. A sword wouldn't be of any use in this situation. If the torrent of bones wasn't even trying to kill them yet, he could only imagine how much more dangerous it would be once it was conscious. The Lord of the Dead was slowly coming to its senses. The bones constituting its repulsive body moved and rippled, unfurling from within the white mass like giant, twisting limbs. It seemed to be slowly turning from a shapeless hill into some semblance of a creature. Sunny hoped that he'd never find out what shape that creature would assume once it fully awoke. Another twisting pillar, limb, suddenly shot from the mass of bones, blindly striking at the empty space behind the giant abomination. Sunny gritted his teeth, his ears ringing from the thunderclap of its impact against the wall. What followed was a deafening noise of thousands of ancient bones scraping against weathered stone. The massive pillar whipped left and right, and then fell to the ground and slowly retreated back inside the body of the Lord of the Dead. Maybe this thing was forming some sort of tail? Meanwhile, Nephis was back at her feet. Dashing toward Kai, she pushed one end of the golden rope into his hands and pointed to the breach in the dome of the chamber. Hurry! In the next moment, the archer soared into the air, flying to his destination with incredible speed. With a terrifying scraping sound, the whole white mountain rippled once again, and several devastating pillars of bone shot to intercept him. However, Sunny's attention was soon pulled from Kai. He had his own problems to worry about, because the Lord of the Dead had extended 2 more limbs in his direction. Diving under the first one, Sunny felt a wave of fetid air rush past him. Knowing that he only had a second left to live, he then strained his muscles and jumped with all his shadow-augmented might. Sunny's body flew several meters into the air, avoiding the rushing bone tentacle only by a few centimeters. Landing in a roll, Sunny cursed and got back to his feet. What kind of an infernal jumping rope game is this? As the Lord of the Dead was slowly coming to its senses, more bone tentacles appeared from the mass of corpses, each moving with growing precision. Luckily, Kai was able to swoop and dodge these tendrils and made it to the palm of the giant stone hand. Planting his feet on the statue, he looped the golden rope around one of its fingers. Cassia was the first one on the rope. With the flying rapier loyally hovering over her shoulder, the blind girl effortlessly moved up the rope, reaching the distant ceiling of the underground chamber less than 10 seconds later. It was easy to forget that she had absorbed as much soul essence as the rest of them. Her delicate arms hid much more power than one would assume. However, back on the ground, those seconds were a real hell. The mountainous creature was waking up, making it hard for the rest of them to stay away from its blindly thrashing limbs. 2 of their party members had made it to safety. They had 4 more to go. Sunny was actually starting to think they might pull this off before the Lord of the Dead even finished constituting itself. Effie was the next one to take the rope. The huntress pulled one arm over the next in quick succession, pushing herself with agility and Herculean strength worthy of an ancient hero. Then it was Castor's turn. Effortlessly dodging a pillar of bone with his incredible speed, the legacy grabbed the rope. Castor's aspect ability granted him enhanced speed, so from Sunny's perspective, he was a barely visible blur as he shot up the rope. In a mere second, Castor was already landing on the giant stone palm. Nephis and Sunny were the only ones left in the reach of the fallen tyrant. Glancing at Sunny, changing star, "Your turn." However, Sunny did not respond. His eyes were fixed on the base of the gargantuan abomination, where, amidst the ancient bones, a weak golden glow emanated from a small, partially concealed object. Sunny lingered for a moment, his thoughts moving with incredible speed. He knew that he was a greedy person by nature, and one cursed with insatiable curiosity too. However, first and foremost, he was someone who put a tremendous amount of value on his own survival. That's why, right now, his reasoning was cold and sober. It was a question of risk and reward, as well as his ability. Would he be able to reach the object shining with the light of divinity and come back alive, or not? A second later, he looked at Nephis. "You go. I'll be just behind you." The truth was, this may be his only chance. He had no plan of visiting the Lord of the Dead again, and he had to know as much as he could about the thin line of divinity that seemed to intrinsically link him to so many aspects of the dream realm. Plus, it would be a shame to go through all of this and not receive anything in return. He had to try. With that, Sunny turned around and dashed toward the Lord of the Dead. The decision was made, and now all that was left was to execute it. Nephis watched in baffled horror, wholly unclear on what Sunny was doing. This was the second time this quest he had run off on a seemingly suicidal mission. Holding the golden rope in her hand, the young woman was forced to ask herself, did she stay behind to help, or trust he knew what he was doing? Summoning the prowling thorn, Sunny threw it at the mountain of bones. Of course, Sunny didn't hope to wound the tyrant. He just wanted to lodge the dagger in its body. Just as the throwing dagger pierced the mass of bones, a white limb suddenly shot in his direction, obstructing everything with its repulsive expanse. Commanding the invisible string to contract, Sonny jumped high into the air and flew forward as though launched from a cannon. Landing on the other side of the pillar, just a few steps away from the writhing mass of bones, Sonny gritted his teeth, then thrust his hand inside the fallen tyrant's body. A moment later, his fist closed around the concealed object, and with some effort, Sonny pulled it out in the clatter of breaking bones. A sharp pain pierced his forearm. Ah! Opening his fist, he saw a small, intricate iron key. It looked almost ordinary, if not for the ethereal golden glow emanating from within it. In the next moment, Sonny suddenly staggered, feeling a wave of weakness wash over his body. Rotating his forearm, he stared blankly at it for a split second, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. And when he did, his eyes widened in terror. Glistening in the dim twilight of the underground chamber, an enormous leech was attached to his forearm. The creature was about a meter long, its slimy skin slightly translucent and red as dried blood. It was incredibly repulsive. What's worse, though, was that its sucker had effortlessly broken through the leather vambrace of the puppeteer's shroud and sunk deep into Sonny's arm, splitting open his skin and muscles. Currently, the leech was gorging on his blood, its belly slowly ballooning as crimson fluid rushed into it with frightening speed. Sonny howled in pain. With a sense of disgust and horror, Sonny slammed his other fist into the spongy flesh of the revolting monster. Augmented with the power of shadows, his punch was powerful enough to easily break a human skull. The abhorrent slug, however, did not even react to it. It just continued sucking out his blood. All Sonny achieved was sending a wave of pain rolling through his body.
Shit! This is not good.
Sonny instantly summoned the Midnight Shard and enhanced its edge with the help of the shadow. Sonny hacked at the leech, putting all his strength behind the strike. The blade of the sword was as sharp as a razor, and with the augmentation provided by the shadow, it slid helplessly off the leech's skin, not leaving even a scratch on it. The slug wasn't affected at all. It was still drinking his blood, consuming a dangerous amount of it with each second. Sonny stared at the disgusting creature dumbfounded. His body was already starting to suffer from blood loss, a sickening weakness slowly spreading through it. There wasn't much time left until it would cause him to lose consciousness and then, inevitably, die. Sonny growled to himself. Think. The leech had broken through his Tier 5 awakened armor without any effort. It was immune to the damage done by the Midnight Shard, which had never failed to cut down any monster he faced before. This could only mean one thing. The damn slug was at the very least fallen beast. Sonny blinked in disbelief. But it's just a bug. This thing is a fallen one? Are you kidding me? If this was true, then nothing he could do would harm the leech. Maybe if he was at the very peak of his rank, there would be a chance. But with his core mostly empty and his aspect ability focused on versatility as opposed to pure might, like Effie's, there was nothing more Sonny could do. The gap between their ranks was just too wide. The Stone Saint could probably wound it, but it would take several seconds for the taciturn monster to appear and take action, seconds that Sonny didn't have. By the time she was able to do anything, he would already be dead, either sucked dry by the abominable slug or crushed to death by the Lord of the Dead. That left Sonny with only one option. If he couldn't get rid of the leech, he was going to have to cut off his arm. Maybe Nephis would be able to grow him a new one, or not. In any case, he had to do it in order to survive. Raising the Midnight Shard over his head, Sonny gritted his teeth and hesitated for a moment. Despite understanding that this was the only way, he was still struggling with the idea of amputating his own limb. His voice screamed in his mind, "Don't think. If you want to live, just do it." With a desperate resolve, he forcefully brought the Midnight Shard down, but then stopped it at the last second, The sharp blade hovered mere centimeters away from his skin. This was not due to the lack of determination, but because Sonny noticed a subtle change happening to the leech. Its belly, which had been expanding rapidly as his blood filled it, stopped ballooning at some point. Now, strange spasms were running through it. What the? In the next moment, the vile creature suddenly convulsed. Letting go of his arm, it dropped to the ground and writhed in agony. Through the translucent film of its skin, Sonny could see the innards of the giant slug bursting open. It was as though it was being torn from within by some invisible force. No, not a force. It was being killed by his blood. The damn leech got poisoned by it. It seemed that Bloodweave was far more odd and tenacious of an attribute than he had thought. A second later, the whole body of the fallen beast simply ruptured, spilling blood everywhere. Sonny stared at it with a blank expression. Bringing him out of the daze, the voice of the spell whispered, "You have slain a fallen beast, Corpse Eater. Your shadow grows stronger." Sonny hadn't even fully processed what happened when the spell continued. "You have received a memory." As his eyes grew wide, Sonny shook off his astonishment and lunged forward. He still had to escape from this damn place. Grabbing the bloodied soul shard from the eviscerated remains of the abominable leech, he turned around and sprinted to the golden rope. Dodging the bone tentacle that burst from the body of the gargantuan tyrant to pursue him, Sonny rolled on the ground, jumped over a pile of broken bones, and finally reached his destination. Sonny reached the golden rope and held on tight. With one arm still withered from the leech, he couldn't pull up the rope. Luckily, it began contracting, bringing him out of the underground chamber. When Sonny was nearly reaching the hand of the stone goddess, a deafening roar thundered from below, washing over his body in an almost palpable wave. The Lord of the Dead was finally awake. But it was already too late. His prey had escaped. Hobbling off the statue's fingers, Sonny fell to his knees in the mud. He tiredly lowered himself to the ground. The breath was escaping from his lungs with laborious, raspy sounds. Weak. He felt so weak and tired. But it was so good to see the sun again. The wounds he had received in the catacombs had finally caught up with Sonny. With adrenaline gone, he was now in a sea of pain. A quiet groan escaped from his lips. That was not fun. While Sonny was contemplating this, a shadow fell over him. Looking up, he saw Nephis glaring at him with a dark expression. She was bloodied and battered, with a deep frown contouring the graceful lines of her usually calm face. Kneeling beside Sonny, Changing Star grimaced. "Are you insane? Why did you do that?" He tried to chuckle, but ended up twisting in an excruciating coughing fit. When Sonny was finally able to breathe again, he muttered a weak reply. "Yes, no, maybe. I don't know. I just saw something shiny." With that, he opened his fist and showed Changing Star the glowing crystal of the ascended soul shard he had scavenged from the corpse of the vile blood-sucking leech. She stared at it for a few moments and then sighed. Without saying anything else, Nephis placed her cool hands on his chest and closed her eyes. A moment later, the purifying white flame spread through his body like a warm embrace, repairing any damage done to it. Even knowing how much pain this cost her, Sonny couldn't help but be happy to feel its touch again. Soon, his pain disappeared. With his head cleared of the fog, he realized that they had done it. They had successfully escaped the Dark City. There was an irony to all of this. Sonny remembered how bitterly Cassia, Nephis, and he had fought to get into the city all those months ago. They thought it was their safety, their rescue, and they'd nearly died escaping it. But they had made it. Now, they need only figure out how, and then there was also the question of the strange key that Sonny almost died for. If it was a key, what was it meant to unlock? A while later, the group was still resting in the shadow of the giant statue. Every member of the cohort looked nothing short of terrible. However, beneath the bloodied clothes and broken armor, their bodies were whole and sound. Changing Star had healed them all, and now she was the only one who was weak and exhausted. Using the white flame so much had taken a heavy toll on her. Sitting in the mud, Sonny raised his head and looked at the giant statue of the faceless woman. She was just like the last time he had seen her, slender and graceful, with her light flowing robe rippling in the wind, as though made out of actual fabric and not hard stone. The statue was tilted slightly to the side, with its one remaining hand reaching high into the sky. A long time ago, on the night of their harrowing escape from the Ashen Barrow, Sonny, Cassia, and Nephis had taken shelter in her palm. It was from its height that he had first seen the walls of the Dark City. Looking down, Sonny stared at the other hand of the giant statue, which had broken off a long time ago and fell down, crushing through the dome of the underground chamber. Sonny sighed and smiled weakly at the imposing statue. "Thank you for saving us again." Then his face darkened. Remembering the events that had transpired in the catacombs, Sonny felt his good mood evaporating. Although he had found the answer to one of the mysteries that had been plaguing him for a while now, he wasn't happy about it. The fate of the inhabitants of the ancient city had always been something that Sonny was very curious about. As an amateur explorer who spent most of his free time studying the ruins of the Dark City, he was familiar with the subtle details of their culture more than most. Learning about the mundane facts of their lives was somewhat of a passion of his. He had known that the history of this ancient civilization ended in tragedy, of course. A cataclysmic disaster had destroyed it, turning the once prosperous land into the desolate hell it was today. But against all logic, Sonny still hoped that these people had somehow managed to survive. Perhaps they had migrated somewhere, leaving the ruins of their city behind. But now he knew that it wasn't so. All of them were right there below him, buried forever in a damp underground chamber, piled onto each other high enough to form a ghastly mountain of bones. More than that, their remains had been soaked in the cursed waters of the Dark Sea and turned into a vessel for the soul of a vile nightmare creature. There were a lot of questions about the fate of these people still lingering in his mind. How did they end up in that dark chamber? Had they died there, or had their bodies been brought there by someone or something later? How was the Lord of the Dead born? Was its inception the same as that of the Soul Devourer? But he didn't really want to know the answers anymore. He felt that learning them would only break his heart. With a sigh, Sonny decided to distract himself from these depressing thoughts with something uplifting and summoned the runes. One cluster in particular interested him the most. Shadow fragments, 322 out of 1,000. The number of shadow fragments earned from each of Sonny's victories reflected the strength of his opponent. When he slayed a dormant creature of his rank, he was granted only 1 shadow fragment per soul core it possessed. An awakened creature would land him 2 fragments for each core. A fallen one, 4. And the time he had killed a great one yielded 16. Basically, the nightmare spell doubled the fragments for killing enemies of higher ranks according to the number of soul cores they possessed. He had received 4 fragments for killing the corpse eater, so through simple math, Sonny could confirm his initial suspicion that the leech was a fallen beast. It made sense to Sonny. His shadow fragments were the same as absorbing soul shards. The primary difference seemed to be that the shadow fragment was automatically absorbed into Sonny's being at the moment of the kill, while soul shards manifested physically and had to be integrated by choice. Sonny decided not to linger on the question any longer. He had been rewarded a memory when the corpse eater died, and it piqued Sonny's curiosity. Looking up, he glanced at the lists of memories. Memories: Silver Bell, Puppeteer's Shroud, Midnight Shard, Parrot Rock, Prowling Thorn, Endless Spring, Blood Arrow. That last one was new. Slightly intrigued, Sonny read its description. Memory, Blood Arrow, Memory Rank, Ascended, Memory Tier, 1, Memory Type, Weapon, Memory Description. A debt of blood must be paid in blood. Sonny arched an eyebrow. That sounds interesting. Memory Enchantments, Reign of Blood and Restitution. Sonny hadn't seen either of these enchantments before. First, he decided to read up on Reign of Blood. Enchantment description. The arrows are created from the wielder's blood, and as such, can rain on the enemies for as long as the archer has any left in their veins. Sonny blinked. That's gruesome. Oh well, on to the next. Enchantment description. If the arrow finds its mark, it will drink the blood of the prey and restore that which had been taken from the archer. If it misses, the archer's blood will be lost forever. The second sentence sent a shiver down Sonny's spine. Creepy. Since Sonny didn't know how to use a bow, this memory was useless to him, which was a real shame because it was the first ascended one he had ever received. Memories of that rank were extremely rare on the Forgotten Shore. He could always feed it to the Stone Saint for a couple of shadow fragments, or... Sonny glanced at Kai and frowned, lost in thought. While the blood arrow was of no use to him, it would be a real boon for the charming archer. With it at his disposal, he wouldn't have to carry a quiver with him, not to mention that each shot he made would be much more devastating. As long as Kai didn't miss, of course. If he did miss, he would be sacrificing his blood for nothing. Transferring the blood arrow to Kai would have made the team much stronger, but Sonny wasn't sure that he was ready to give up his first and only ascended memory. Not for free, at least. Torn, he dismissed the runes and decided to think about it later. In other news, the Bloodweave had revealed a new trait. Turns out, Sonny's blood was poisonous, or rather, damaging to anyone who ingested it. At least it seemed that way from the manner of the Corpse Eater's death. He would have to experiment to find out more later. Or not. Honestly, Sonny didn't even know how one would go about checking something like that, and wasn't particularly eager to find out. After dismissing the runes, Sonny finally decided to take a look at the mysterious key. Subtly glancing around, he furtively took it out from beneath the vambrace of the puppeteer's shroud, where he had hidden it earlier. The intricate iron key lay on his palm, glowing with a pale golden light. The light of divinity. Sonny had no idea what the key was supposed to open. He had taken an insane risk and almost died to get it. Was it worth it? Honestly, he wasn't sure. But deep down, Sonny felt that it was. For some reason, he sensed that the small iron key would turn out to be extremely important to him. Sadly, the cohort did not get a lot of time to rest. They weren't sure how many more challenges they'd have to endure, but they knew that they had a lot of ground to cover before the sun set and the tides shifted. So even though it wasn't even noon, they decided there wasn't a second more to waste on healing. The plan they had made at the start of the day was to leave the Dark City from the south by climbing the wall near the grandiose main gates and then travel through the labyrinth to the next safe height, which was about 10 kilometers away. However, due to the fact that they had ended up in the catacombs instead and had to escape through the chamber belonging to the Lord of the Dead, the party was now to the east of the ruins, near the beautiful statue of the Faceless Woman. Not only did they have to circle around the city now, but there was also less time to reach safety before the flood of darkness devoured the Forgotten Shore once again. Standing up in a chorus of disappointed groans, the cohort assumed the marching formation and set out south. Walking through the mud of the colossal crater was not easy, but for the time being, they had no other choice. unless they wanted to scale the monumental stone wall and return to the Dark City, of course. Luckily, with both Sunny's shadow and Kai scouting the way ahead, they didn't have to worry about being ambushed by monsters. So for the time being, the only thing the party had to struggle with was moving their feet through the wet dirt. The monotonous silence was broken only by laborious breathing and slurping of mud. A while later, the impregnable and seemingly endless gray wall that loomed some distance away and above them slowly twisted, drifting away from the edge of the crater. They were finally leaving the cursed ruins behind. Turning around, Sunny looked back and studied the site of the city that had been his whole world for these past 4, almost 5 months. Far away, the floor of the gargantuan crater sharply rose, forming a tall slope. On it stood the unassailable wall of polished gray stone, firm and unyielding despite the thousands of years that had passed since the demise of its creators. From where he stood, Sunny could see the flood of crimson coral swelling at its base, sharp blades powerlessly scraping against the cold stone in hopeless attempts to find purchase. It looked as though the city was being besieged by the land itself. Sunny thought to himself, if it knew what awaits inside, the labyrinth would be trying to escape as far as possible from that damned place instead. With a sigh, Sunny looked up and noticed a lone human figure standing on the wall, watching them disappear into the distance. That figure was crooked and dark, emanating a cold feeling of foreboding. A few moments later, it turned away and disappeared from view. Horace had chosen to return to the Bright Castle. Trying not to shiver, Sunny lingered for a few seconds and then hurried to catch up with the group. How long had that horrid creature been watching? Did he know about their plan? Or had he happened upon them by coincidence? It must have been a chance. After all, their plan wasn't supposed to lead them here. Horace wouldn't know to expect them unless he had been watching them, unless he knew about the Lord of the Dead and the tunnels. Sunny shook his head. There was no point in worrying about Horace. They were safe from him. At least for now. Because the crater was too big, the bent of its edge was almost imperceptible. Only by looking far into the distance could one say that it was actually curved. Because of this, the cohort could have continued traveling through the crater for a long time without having to move further away from the goal of today's journey, which lay to the southwest of their current position. However, they had to leave the crater and return to the labyrinth sooner or later, not only to escape the black water, but also because there was nothing to hide behind on the vast muddy plain. If any flying nightmare creature decided to attack them from above, the cohort would have no defense against it. The labyrinth, while hiding its own fair share of terrifying threats, at least offered some measure of protection. That's why, at some point, Nephis led the party to the sharp slope of the crater, and then the 6 of them climbed out of it. With the help of Kai and the trusty golden rope, the task wasn't hard at all. For some time after that, they walked on the ridge separating the crater from the labyrinth proper, but then, finally, had to turn west and enter the maze of crimson coral. Sunny couldn't help but sigh once the familiar coral walls surrounded him once again. He didn't miss the first months of his infernal voyage into the dream realm at all. Well, maybe a little, but not because of the damn labyrinth itself, that's for sure. But he had failed to realize the simplicity of his life back then. It was something he'd never have again, and something he longed for. The Crimson Forest was simultaneously the same and vastly different from the region of it he had traveled through before. The coral maze itself was pretty much identical to how it had been east of the gargantuan crater. However, the creatures populating it in these parts were vastly different. There were no members of the Carapace Legion around, at least not anywhere Sunny could see. Instead, the dominant tribe of nightmare creatures in this region seemed to consist of nasty spider-like critters that had a habit of decorating the walls and passages of the labyrinth with endless amounts of gray, incredibly sticky cobwebs. What's worse, their webs seemed to be made not out of spider silk, but out of thin metal wires that were as tough as iron and could cut the victim into little pieces if it thrashed too much after getting caught. Needless to say, getting yourself stuck in these webs was tantamount to a death sentence. The deeper into the labyrinth they went, the more of these cobwebs surrounded them. It came to the point where they had to use Cassia's flying rapier to clear the path ahead every few minutes, slowing down the speed of the cohort to a crawl. During one of those stops, Sonny rubbed his face and thought, "I just hope nothing attacks us while we wait." With the webs greatly inhibiting their ability to dodge and maneuver, being attacked by even a low-level creature here could turn out to be a challenge. Effie turned to him and glared. She tiredly shook her head and placed one palm across her face.
Don't say that out loud, doofus.
Sonny rolled his eyes.
Oh, grow up. It's not like the spiders can hear us talk about them.
As if on cue, several massive spider-like creatures jumped out of the cracks in the coral and attacked them. The spiders were about the size of a human, incredibly fast, and had plates of something that resembled iron covering parts of their repulsive bodies. They looked like armored battle machines created for the sole purpose of slaughtering living things. They also looked strangely familiar. With a little effort, Sonny realized that these abominations looked a lot like lesser, much smaller versions of the giant fallen beasts that had destroyed the original Stone Saint and her kin. It's just that their size and armor weren't nearly as formidable. If so, "I have bad news for you fools," Sonny thought with a smirk. As soon as the spiders attacked, the members of the cohort reacted with the deadly calmness of experienced Dark City hunters. Weapons flashed in the air, severing limbs and piercing through iron as though it were paper. Effie straight up flattened one of the creatures with a devastating strike of her battered shield. The poor beast didn't even have time to understand what a huge mistake it had made. The others were no less efficient. Sonny himself threw the prowling thorn and pulled on the invisible string as soon as it sunk into the flesh of one of the spiders, bringing its jump to an abrupt end and sending it crashing to the ground. Before the beast could stand up, Quiet Dancer streaked through the air and pierced its head clean through. Just a few short seconds after the spiders had tried to ambush the group of humans, the battle was over. 3 dead nightmare creatures were sprawled in the mud, while the 4th one ended up pinned to a coral wall with several arrows. They could have even shaved a second or two if it weren't for the need to look out for the spider webs. Sonny shook his head. Disappointing. Wait, why was he disappointed? Great! This was great! Not every victory had to almost cost him his life. Sonny shook his head.
What is wrong with me? Am I addicted to the adrenaline?
If there was one thing to feel disappointed about, it was that this one was so swift that he had not even gotten the chance to finish any of the enemies himself, thus not receiving any rewards from the spell. But even then, he would be glad to only fight easy battles like this in the future. Nephis cleaned the blade of her sword with a piece of cloth, listened to the silence for a few moments to make sure that nothing else was going to attack them, and then gave the cohort the go-ahead to start dressing the monsters down. Soon, soul shards, strips of meat, and other useful parts were cut, cleaned, and put into Effie's enchanted bag. Everything was done with efficient speed and professionalism that could only come from a lot of experience. Sonny could only shake his head. They were able to dispose of the iron spiders with ease because of 2 reasons. First, as far as nightmare creatures went, these were not on the same level as even the carapace scavengers. They had a slight advantage in speed, but were not nearly as strong, agile, and ridiculously tough. If Sonny could guess, he would say that the iron spiders relied heavily on their webs and battlefield advantage to defeat their prey. Because the cohort had destroyed the webs in advance, their main advantage was gone. The second reason was the cohort itself. They were some of the deadliest humans on the Forgotten Shore. Sonny was sure that at least 4 of them could kill a pathfinder of the host in single combat, if not one of the lieutenants themselves. Except for, perhaps, Horus, but that was due to whatever horrifying aspect ability he seemed to possess. They were the best and brightest the outer settlement could offer. After all, Effie had been right when she said that there had never been such a powerful cohort outside the walls of the Bright Castle before. All in all, the 6 of them were equipped to handle more than just 3 awakened beasts. The labyrinth was going to have to try much harder if it wished to see them dead. Sunny chuckled. Just 3 awakened beasts. Yeah, how crazy did that sound? And yet, it was true. Finishing up with the dead spiders, the cohort indifferently left their eviscerated bodies behind and continued on their way. After several more minor skirmishes with the iron spiders, they had finally reached their destination. Not too far away from them, colored pink by the evening sun, a magnificent arch of white marble rose high above the sea of crimson coral. The giant structure was clearly created by the same people who had built the Bright Castle, and made from the same stone. It looked like a much larger sibling of the pristine arch that guarded the entrance to the White Road, which climbed all the way to the outer settlement. Only this one was much more weathered, bleak, and damaged. Signs of corrosion and deep cracks covered its surface, with one of its sides being partially collapsed. Sunny studied the arch and looked at Nephis. "Is this our stop for the night?" She gave him a simple nod, and after a short pause said, "We need to pick up our pace. The night is close, and we might have to fight to clear the top of it." Sunny sighed. Fighting again. When would they finally be able to rest? It had been such a long day. However, he kept his mouth shut. Changing Star was the most tired out of all of them, due to healing all their wounds no less, and he didn't see her complaining, so it wasn't his place. To his left, Effie suddenly cursed and groaned. She did not seem to have anything close to the same thoughts he had.
More fighting? Come on, when are we finally going to eat?
Sunny blinked, but internally he knew she had a point.
Well, that works too, I guess.
Staring at the huntress, Nephis shook her head and silently walked forward. Soon, they reached the giant arch. Kai summoned his bow and flew up, only to return a few minutes later and report that no terrible monster was nesting on top of the ancient structure. With sighs of relief, the members of the cohort climbed the golden rope one after another and were soon standing far above the labyrinth, silently watching as the flood of black water drowned it in the lightless depths. As the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, they were left on a rectangular island made out of white marble. All around it, there was nothing but the undulating waves of the dark sea. Sunny was once again surrounded from all sides by nothing but darkness and black water. He did not like the feeling. The night passed with no incidents. In the morning, Sunny was woken up by the sound of the surging waves and opened his eyes to see the sun slowly rising from beyond the horizon. Rubbing his face, he sat up and looked around. Noticing that most of the cohort was still asleep, only Kai, who had been the last one to stand watch, was awake, sitting on the edge of the arch and admiring the dawn with a dreamy look on his face. Sunny wanted to call out to him and warn the charming archer not to sit this close to the edge, but then remembered that Kai could fly.
Yeah, like I could forget it again.
Using the opportunity, he dove into the Soul Sea and summoned Stone Saint from the depths of the Shadow Core, where she was sleeping in the embrace of nurturing black flames. Just like before, the shadow did not appear from a sphere of light like an echo would, but stepped out from a whirlpool of dark fire. Then stood motionlessly in front of Sunny like an actual statue, seemingly indifferent both to his presence and the wounds covering her body. Sunny walked around the Stone Saint, studying the extent of damage done to her by the undead horde. The armor of the taciturn knight was battered and broken, pierced in several places by the claws of the countless skeletons she had fought. The ruby dust wasn't flowing from the breaches anymore, but he could see deep gashes on her smooth gray skin. He frowned. Bastards. Who dares to hurt his shadow? Shaking his head, Sonny dismissed the saint, sending her back into the restorative darkness of the Shadow Core. The damage, while extensive, was not really threatening to her existence. In a couple of days, his pet monster should fully recover. In fact, she already looked better than she had yesterday. Leaving the Soul Sea, Sonny inhaled the fresh air. He lingered for a few moments and then turned to Kai.
Hey, Knight, are you stupid? Don't sit this close to the edge.
The charming archer looked at him and raised an eyebrow. I can fly, remember? If I fall, it's not that big of a deal. Sonny scoffed.
I'm not worried about you falling into the cursed sea. I'm worried about something dragging you off into it. That'd be terrible, right?
Quite happy with himself, he grinned and turned away.
What a nice way to start the day.
Because everyone needed some time to rest and recuperate, they decided to spend a day on the Marble Arch and continue their journey tomorrow. As a result, Sonny was currently staring at the sight that wasn't really funny, but filled him with mirth nevertheless. Back in the real world, when he had time to consume some entertainment, Sonny had noticed a certain popular trope. In most dramas, webtoons, and cartoons aimed at young boys and teenagers, the heroes would inevitably end up spending a day at the beach during their adventures. He didn't quite know why such a trope existed. He suspected it was a way to slow down the plot, to add in some lighter character moments, or amp up the romance plot lines a bit. Not that he had anything against it. In any case, Sonny had never imagined that he was going to end up in such an episode himself one day. He thought to himself, "This is simply hilarious." Barely holding himself from laughing out loud, Sonny glanced at his companions. Because everyone's armor and weapons were damaged during the battle in the catacombs, they had to keep these memories inside the Soul Sea for a bit of time to allow them to restore themselves, just like Stone Saint was currently doing in the depths of his Shadow Core. As a result, all of them, including Sonny himself, were currently wearing nothing except for some loincloths, and in the case of the girls, makeshift brassieres. They gave a sense of post-apocalyptic bathing suits. Granted, these crude undergarments weren't really swimsuits, and the Marble Arch could barely be considered a beach even at night. But still, the situation was funnily similar. They were all half naked and relaxing in the middle of something that someone could call an adventure, so it was close enough. The absurdity of it all put Sonny in a rather good mood. Everyone was busy doing their own thing. There was a fire in the middle of the arch, with roasting meat filling the air with an appetizing aroma. Effie was tending to it. The tan and lean body of the muscular huntress looked like it was cut from stone, as if she was a sculpture of an ancient goddess come to life. Sonny was transfixed by her beauty in the blazing sun. After a couple of seconds of thoughtless bliss, Sonny had to hurriedly look away. The last thing he wanted was for her to notice.
Pure thoughts,
Sonny silently yelled to himself. Nephis was helping Effie with the breakfast. Next to the vigorous huntress, her figure seemed especially slender and lithe. However, she was also extremely athletic in appearance. Her ivory skin was pleasantly contrasted against the olive skin of their boisterous pathfinder.
What a sight to behold.
From a purely aesthetic standpoint, of course. Sonny blushed and looked away, praying to whatever god could hear him that they would mistake his flush for a sunburn. Seeing Changing Star like that reminded Sonny of the early days of their stay in the Dream Realm. Things had been much simpler back then. Suddenly wistful, he looked away and checked what Cassia was doing. The blind girl was resting near the fire, wrapped in her beautiful cloak. With her delicate features and small stature, she looked extremely lovely. And then, there were Kai and Castor. Sonny sighed and looked down at his own body. Honestly, after all these months spent hunting monsters, eating meat, and absorbing shadow fragments, he looked much better than he used to. In fact, by human standards, he was nothing short of, well, above average. Even as far as Awakened went, he could probably compete with some in the looks department. But Kai and Castor were simply on another level. Kai was tall and shaped like a young god, with lean muscles rolling under his flawless skin and a svelte figure that begged to be sculpted into a marble masterpiece. Sunny could swear that even sunlight was attracted to him, illuminating the charming archer in just a way to make him look as though he was glowing from within. Currently, Kai was tending to his arrows, somehow managing to make even that simple task look glamorous. Castor was much the same, with a perfect body and broad shoulders that simply screamed of power, appeal, and potency. With a darker skin to match his gallant and manly image, he was basically the epitome of masculinity. This was contrasted by a handsome but gentle face and humorous green eyes, creating a rather tempting visage. Sunny grimaced and turned away. He needed to take his mind off the attractive creatures that seemed to surround him.
You know what? To hell with this beach day nonsense. Let's do something productive.
Walking over to Kai, Sunny cleared his throat and forced himself to not cover his eyes. The damn archer was just too dazzling. Kai being shirtless in crowded places should have honestly been categorized as a public hazard back in the real world. If not, there was a gross oversight.
I wonder how he was made. Probably in a secret government laboratory or a magic cauldron of some sort. I mean, there's no way that this dude is the same species as me, right?
After a few seconds of Sunny blankly staring at him, Kai smiled politely. Sunny? Did you want something? Sunny flinched and covered his eyes.
Don't smile at me.
Kai blinked and narrowed his eyes in confusion. All right. Breathing heavily, Sunny slowly lowered his hand and glared at Kai.
That's better. And yes, I did want something.
Kai suddenly livened up and pointed at his chest. What is that? An accessory? Sunny frowned.
What is he talking about?
Lowering his gaze, Sunny noticed the mysterious key hanging on a thread tied around his neck. He didn't want to show it to anyone, but with the puppeteer's shroud restoring itself in the Soul Sea, there were not a lot of places where he could hide it. None that he was willing to use, at least. Plus, no one else was supposed to be able to see the light of divinity, so to them, it just looked like a small iron key. Sunny frowned.
It's not an accessory, it's a key.
Kai hesitated. Oh, what does it open? Sunny shrugged.
I'm not sure yet.
The charming archer seemed a little confused. But if it's not an accessory and it doesn't open anything, why are you carrying it around? His questions were starting to get tiresome. Sunny sighed.
To open something, of course. Whenever I find it, that is.
Kai scratched his nose. But you just said that you don't know what it opens. Sunny gritted his teeth. Between the fatigue and the punishingly hot sun, his frustration was rising.
It's a damn key, right? So it has to open something. I just carry it around in case I find something that can be opened by that damned key. What's so hard to understand?
The beautiful archer gave him a strange look. Oh, I see. I mean, that definitely makes sense. At least I get the curiosity of it all. Sunny cringed, cursing himself. This was not at all how he had planned to approach him. Sunny instantly changed his expression and looked at Kai with a wide smile. The sudden shift looked sort of creepy.
What I wanted to say, Knight, my dear friend, we are friends, right? Anyway, what I wanted to say was that I hope that this answer satisfies your curiosity. That's something a friend would say, right?
The charming young man gave him a dubious look. I guess? Sonny made his smile wider, feeling his face hurt a little.
Great, so we are friends. Well, some might say that it's your lucky day, buddy. Because today, and only today, probably, Sonny's Gorgeous Emporium offers customers an exclusive friendship deal. Just for friends of the establishment. Aren't you lucky?
Kai furrowed his brows and looked like he was suppressing a laugh. Wasn't it Sonny's brilliant emporium last time? Sonny blinked.
Was it? Well, it doesn't matter. The deal still stands. Are you interested or not?
The archer lingered for a few moments and then cautiously said, But, Sonny, you still haven't told me what exactly the deal entails. Is it a deal for customers you consider friends, or are you trying to sell me your friendship? Or wait, do you want to buy mine? Or both? I'm confused. As if waiting for that response, Sonny nodded energetically.
Yes, I'm glad that you asked. In fact, I have an incredible item that I want to sell. It's so incredible that I am even reluctant to part with it. But since you are my friend, I'm willing to give it away, practically for free. Full friendship discount just for you. No need to thank me, really.
Attracted by the noise, the others left what they were doing and were now staring at the two of them. Effie got distracted from preparing meat and was now observing the circus with an expectant grin. Realizing that he is now the center of attention, Kai sighed. All right, I'll bite. What is that incredible item you want to sell me? Sonny remained silent for a few moments and then suddenly stopped smiling.
Oh, just something I had gathering dust in my soul, see? It's a memory that can serve as an endless supply of arrows, as long as you don't miss.
The beautiful archer's eyes suddenly lit up. He glanced at his quiver and said, Wait, really? You have such a memory? After thinking about it for a long time, Sonny decided to give the blood arrow to Kai. Having the archer of their cohort armed with it would make a lot of things easier during this journey. He could potentially earn himself a bow in the future and learn how to use it, but it wouldn't be anytime soon. Plus, with how dangerous the enchantments of the blood arrow were, nothing short of excellence would fly. And excellence took a lot of time to achieve, time that he didn't have. So giving it to a skilled archer like Kai was a better decision. Their recent encounters with the iron spiders only made Sonny more certain that this was the right thing to do, but he wasn't going to give it away for free.
Yes, I do have such a memory.
Then Sonny casually added,
Oh, did I forget to say it can provide an endless supply of arrows? And also, all those arrows will be of the ascended rank?
A grave silence settled over the marble arch. Kai was stunned. Castor, who had slowly approached their conversation, spoke first. You have an ascended memory? Kai didn't have to ask, because he already knew that Sonny was telling the truth. His eyes slightly widened. On the Forgotten Shore, ascended memories were exceedingly rare, for obvious reasons. Sleepers could only get one by defeating a fallen nightmare creature, and there weren't many people capable of such a feat. Added to that was the fact that not every kill provided a memory. In fact, most didn't. To receive one was the dream of every inhabitant of the Dark City, but Sonny just shrugged.
Oh, I have a couple. Why?
The other was the onyx armor, which was broken and useless, but they didn't need to know that. Sonny grinned.
Only the best wares in Sonny's astonishing emporium. Was it astonishing? Who cares? You get the sentiment.
Castor shook his head. How did you get an ascended memory? You? The grin froze on Sonny's face. When he spoke a few moments later, all humor was gone from his voice, replaced by coldness.
Well, if you have to know, I got it by killing a fallen beast. Before you ask, this time I didn't have to shake my finger or spit. I just looked at it, and it died.
Then he turned his head and looked straight at Castor.
I am very proficient in killing things, you know.
In the end, Kai agreed to his deal. In exchange for the blood arrow, he gave Sonny 3 memories, the 2 weaker arrows he had, and a small charm capable of producing fire. Sonny fed all 3 to the Stone Saint, bringing her amount of shadow fragments to 31. That was 4 more than she had in the past, which meant that he received the same amount of fragments that he would have gotten by feeding her the blood arrow itself. He didn't really gain anything, but also didn't lose anything. Kai was the one who really profited in their exchange, though Sonny had to admit, Kai being able to fire more arrows with this boon would be good for the group as a whole. But Sonny didn't lie when he said that it was an incredible deal for Kai. After breakfast, which transpired in somewhat awkward silence, Sonny sprawled on the ground and smiled happily.
You know, guys, these past few weeks made me realize something. Actually, it was all thanks to Kai who introduced me to Stev.
Effie stretched, making Sonny stutter and lose the train of thought for a second, then smiled with satisfaction and glanced at him. Really? And what is that? Sonny hesitated for a few moments, then said,
When I was a little kid, I loved reading webtoons about the Awakened. You know, the ones where they always explore ancient ruins, battle nightmare creatures, and grow more powerful with each victory.
He chuckled.
The hero and his cohort decide on an adventure, vanquish evil, gain mighty memories, then return to the real world and sell their spoils at the adventurer shop. They spend their money to upgrade their equipment and immediately set out on a more epic and dangerous adventure.
Cassia smiled. I loved reading those too. Sonny glanced at her and sighed.
Yeah, but when I got older, I couldn't help but think, what are they thinking about? Exploring ancient ruins is not a wise thing to do. In fact, only crazy people would do it. No matter how good you are, sooner or later you will meet something more terrifying than any human can handle and die. If this was real life, why would all those adventurers go into the ruins over and over again?
The blind girl tilted her head and opened her mouth, but then closed it again. Sonny smiled.
But then it hit me. I don't think they were doing it to vanquish evil. I think they were doing it to collect a wide variety of powerful memories. The real fantasy is not to be the hero or one of their companions, or even the love interest. The real dream is to be the owner of the shop where the hero sells his trophies and buys new equipment. That way you can live a pretty life without risking your neck. That's the real goal.
He crossed his arms and added,
After a few short years of adventuring around the dream realm and collecting memories, you can retire, open a shop, and live comfortably for the rest of your life. All you need is to sell a memory once every couple of years, maybe make some money off the younger, less fortunate adventurers.
Kai laughed and looked at Sonny with curiosity. So, say we somehow manage to return to the real world and become true awakened. Is that what you're going to do? Sonny thought about it for a few moments and shrugged.
I don't know. I don't really have a lot to do in the real world, apart from compiling all the things I've learned about the Forgotten Shore into a report and giving it to a teacher who was kind to me back at the academy. So, maybe? I don't have enough memories yet to open a real store, though.
He glanced at the charming archer and smiled.
What about you? What is the thing you want to do if we return to the real world?
Kai suddenly turned away with a look of embarrassment on his face. Oh, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. But after several seconds, he suddenly said in a shy voice, Avatar singer? Sunny blinked.
A what?
The archer hesitated for a while and then explained. Avatar Singer is a music competition show. Popular singers compete with each other, but the twist is that they are all using the stock VR avatars to perform. So, the judges can only evaluate their voices and skill. They only learn the singer's identity after. Effie giggled. Why would you want to hide your pretty face, Knight? It's your best feature. Kai was silent for a few moments, and then smiled gently. I just think that it would be nice to be judged based on my skill and talent alone, with nothing else getting in the way. Also, that would be such a great way to announce my return to the fans. Just imagine, they would be so excited. That would be a perfect media storm. Sunny shook his head. It seemed that Kai was really a celebrity. Talking about things like fan reactions and media storms with a straight face, it was so surreal. But it was a nice dream, at least. Better than his own stupid desires by far. Turning to Effie, Sunny asked, What about you? What would you do in the real world? The huntress grinned. I don't even have to think about it. I would go eat chicken wings, the real ones, and then start preparing myself for the second nightmare. Pretty simple. Everybody grew silent. The second nightmare. They didn't even know if they would escape the first one. The second felt so implausibly far away, and even more exhausting. None of them thought this one would take this long, but now they didn't even know if it would ever end. Sunny grimaced. How could she even think about another nightmare? After a while, Cassia said, Are you sure that you want to challenge another nightmare? Effie shrugged. I have my reasons, so yes, for me, that is the only choice. The blind girl was quiet for a bit and then said, I would go and spend time with my mom and dad. That's the thing I would want to do most in the real world. Castor glanced at her and curtly nodded. I agree with Cassia. Family is the most important. When I come back, I will greet my father and look him in the eyes with pride, knowing that I did not let our clan down. Then, I will try to do everything in my power to grow as fast as possible, to relieve him of his worries and propel our bloodline to new heights. Sunny rolled his eyes. How very legacy-like of him. Finally turning to Nephis, Sunny looked at her with a subtly dark expression and asked, How about you, Neph? What are you going to do when you return to the real world? Changing Star was silent for a while, looking into the distance with a calm expression. Then she sighed and answered in a quiet voice. I would go visit my mom too. Everyone grew silent. Sunny blinked a little confused. Wait, your mom? I thought she was dead. Nephis lingered for a bit and then turned her face away. She is, technically. Technically dead? What does she mean? Sunny glanced at the others and saw that they too were confused. Everyone except for Castor, that is, who seemed like he knew something. A few moments passed in tense silence, which was broken by Changing Star's sigh. Looking at them, she said evenly, My mother is one of the Hollow. She became Hollow while pregnant with me, actually. So I never really met her. Just her body. Nephis grew silent. After a while, a strange smile appeared on her face. It's funny. When my grandmother was still alive, I made a point of treating that body as nothing but a corpse. But once she passed away and we were the only ones left, well, I found myself getting a bit conflicted. Nephis shrugged and turned away once again, avoiding the eyes of her companions. Anyway, before leaving for the first nightmare, I used what little money there was left of our estate to buy her a VIP spot in a specialized hollow care facility. They are treating her really well, but still, I don't like the idea of her being alone there. So, when I return, that's what I'm going to do. Visit her. No one said anything, heavily affected by her words. Sunny stared at Changing Star, trying to imagine what it must have felt like to grow up in the company of your parents' soulless shell, with death staring at you through those empty eyes every day, always looming over you like a dark shadow, both of your past and your future. Maybe that was part of the reason why Nephis hated the spell so much. It had to be. It took so much from her. Even with being a legacy, she was powerful and from a powerful line, but at such a horrible cost. Sensing the heaviness in the air, Changing Star glanced at them and smiled darkly. What? Is this your first time meeting a Hollowborn? Well, I can't blame you. Creatures of my breed are pretty rare. In fact, I haven't ever met another one either. Then she sighed and stretched her legs, moving them closer to the fire. So yeah, that and dye my hair. These are the things I would do in the real world first. Sunny blinked. Dye your hair? Nephis nodded. Sunny shook his head, thinking, how is that a priority? Feeling that he was missing something, Sunny scratched his head and asked, why? She glanced at him in surprise. What do you mean, why? I'm not used to it, and it's weird. Do I need another reason? He stared at her with a perplexed expression. Noticing it, Changing Star frowned and asked with a tiny hint of amusement in her voice, Sunny, did you perhaps think that this was my natural hair color? He was silent for a while, then opened his mouth and closed it again. It's not? Sunny felt heat rising in his cheeks with embarrassment. Nephis looked at him for a while with a strange expression, and then suddenly exploded with laughter. Her laugh was melodic, pure, and very pleasant to the ear. With regret, Sunny realized that he had never heard it before. He wished that their lives were different so that people could hear Nephis laugh more often. But they weren't, and would probably never be. After a while, she glanced at him and smiled. Sunny, it's silver for spell's sake. Who has natural silver hair? Luckily, at that point, Kai suddenly came to his rescue. Actually, I thought that it was natural too. It suits you very well, Lady Nephis. Changing Star turned to him with an expression of utter surprise. Then she glanced at Effie with a silent question. The huntress nodded with a wink. Yeah, me too. I mean, who knows what you legacies are even made of? Nephis blinked a couple of times, then shook her head in bewilderment. Well, no, it's not natural. It changed to this color after my first nightmare. Kai leaned forward with curiosity. Really? What color was your hair before? She shrugged. Black, a normal human color. The charming archer stared at her and then smiled. That would suit you very well too, Lady Nephis. Ah, I can just see it. However, Sunny couldn't. The idea of changing Star without her arresting, eye-catching silver hair simply could not fit into his head, let alone the fact that she was a brunette. How was this even possible? He just could not picture it.
That would look so wrong, right?
He thought, but he kept those thoughts to himself. Well, as it turned out, life was full of surprises. And if she wanted to dye her hair back to black, if that's what would make her happy, he hoped she would get the chance to do so. Today, he learned not one but two entirely new things about the person he thought he knew best in the world. Who would have guessed that this would happen? He thought back to those awakened webcomics he used to read.
There might be something else except for skimpy swimsuits to those beach episodes, huh?
After that, they spent some time resting and lazily conversing with each other. However, pretty soon, people started to get restless from boredom. To combat it somehow, Sunny suggested the idea of playing a sports game. His motives were not at all dictated by a secret desire to see a bunch of absolutely gorgeous young people jump around and wrestle with each other while very lightly dressed. Nope, not one bit. However, things didn't go as he had envisioned them. Pretty soon, Sunny found himself cursing as he was desperately pulling on the golden rope in a furious match of tug-of-war. Well, it was supposed to be furious, but what was actually transpiring was Effie casually holding the rope with one hand, while the four of them, Sunny, Cassia, Kai, and Castor, were trying to move her from the spot with no visible results whatsoever. After a while, the Huntress simply pulled on the rope and sent their entire team to the ground.
That's cheating, or...
With a satisfied grin, Effie walked over and towered above him, her arms akimbo. Looking down directly at Sunny, she smirked. "Wait, when did you lose your spirit, Shorty?" Then she winked and said in a mischievous tone, "Back at the cathedral you were able to perform better, not to mention last longer." Sunny grew bright red and gritted his teeth.
Shut up! People will misunderstand.
The Huntress looked at him with a shocked expression.
Misunderstand? What are you... Oh!
Then she pretended to be horrified and covered her mouth with one hand.
You, what kind of degenerate are you? Training! I meant while you were training.
While Sunny was staring at her in utter disbelief, his mouth opened wide. Effie snorted and then turned away and exploded with laughter. Shaking her head, the boisterous Huntress giggled one last time and walked away.
No more sports games. Ever. That wretched troublemaker will win them all anyway.
He needed to teach himself how to come up with better ideas. With a bit of disappointment, Sunny realized that all types of physical activities were out of the question, not only because Effie was going to win every damn game, but also because Cassia couldn't participate in most. If that was the case, they would have to settle for a battle of wit instead. After thinking for a while, Sunny made a few preparations and addressed his companions in a mischievous tone.
All right, let's have another competition. This time, it will be a challenge for your minds.
Sunny paused for a few moments and then smiled.
And to spice things up, this time there will be a prize. The winner gets this.
With that, he produced the Ascended Soul Shard that he had gotten from the Corpse Eater from behind his back and showed it to everyone. The beautiful crystal shined with an alluring, ethereal light. Except for Nephis, who was resting with her eyes closed, everyone stared at the shard with a lot of interest. Sunny grinned. Of course they were interested. It was very rare to see one of these. He didn't personally have a use for this thing right now, though, and making the cohort stronger would, in turn, increase his own chances of getting through the expedition alive. So parting with the shard was not that detrimental, especially if he could have some fun in return. Effie was the first one to speak.
What are the terms of the competition?
Sonny put the crystal away before answering.
I'll give you a riddle, and the first person to answer correctly wins. How does that sound?
The huntress looked at him with doubt and shrugged.
Sounds boring, but all right, let's play.
Smiling, Sonny commanded the shadow to separate from him and put the ordinary rock on it. Then, he turned to Effie and said,
Listen carefully. Imagine, if you will, that the two of us, my shadow and I, are in possession of a rare treasure. One of us is an honorable, extremely attractive awakened who can tell no lie, while the other one is a vile, ugly, stupid devil who will never tell a word of truth. But you don't know which one is which.
Effie grinned.
I mean, isn't it obvious?
Sonny blinked.
Shut up. Also, it's an imaginary situation, okay? Anyway, you have to find out which one of us is hiding the treasure. If you do, you'll get the treasure. If you don't, the devil will kill you. You can only ask one question, either to me or the shadow, understand?
The huntress giggled and flexed her muscles.
Can I just beat the answer out of you?
Sonny observed her for a moment too long and then smiled.
You can. Also, you're dead.
Effie stared at him in bewilderment.
What? Why?
He shrugged and glanced in her direction with disdain.
Did I not tell you that you could only ask one question? Who told you to ask whether you can beat me up or not? What a stupid way to waste a question.
While the unruly huntress was throwing daggers at him with her eyes, Sonny turned away from her.
Next.
Kai smiled apologetically at Effie and approached him. Sonny smiled at his friend.
All right, Knight. What's your question? Do you consider that our rules might have changed since the last round?
The charming young man gestured at the marble beneath his feet and addressed the shadow.
What color is the stone I am pointing to?
Since Sonny had expected such a turn of events, the ordinary rock immediately answered in the deepest voice he could muster.
White.
Kai looked at Sonny with a triumphant smile and said,
So, I win. The shadow is obviously the honorable awakened.
Sonny gave him a nod.
You indeed learned which of us is a dirty liar. Surprise, it was me. However, that was not the task. The task was to find out which of us was hiding the treasure. And you have already used up your only question. So, sorry, buddy, but you're also dead. I'll miss you very much in this hypothetical situation.
The charming archer sighed and looked at him with reproach. Sonny raised his eyebrows.
What? Why are you looking at me like this? Be grateful that I allowed you to play at all. With your flaw, you are like a walking cheat as far as this game is concerned.
He scowled and then added,
In fact, the mere fact that you claim to have a flaw is an affront to us truly flawed people.
Kai lingered for a bit and walked to the side to sit near Effie. Sonny had to suppress his laugh when he noticed that the boisterous huntress reacted to being this close to the charming young man's deific body pretty much exactly the same as he himself sometimes reacted to her. Sonny kept his jeering to himself as he thought,
Get your head out of the gutter, pure thoughts, Effie.
A wide grin still found its way onto his face. Shaking his head, Sonny turned away to call the next contestant, but Kai suddenly spoke, interrupting him.
You're not entirely right, you know,
he said gently. Sonny raised an eyebrow.
About what?
The archer looked down before answering.
About my flaw. Yes, it's not as heavy of a burden as many others have to carry, but it's still a curse.
Sonny's brows furrowed. He wondered,
what is he talking about? It's almost entirely like a second aspect ability.
Looking at Kai with a doubtful expression, Sunny asked,
Yeah? How exactly? Please explain, because I really can't think of a situation where this flaw of yours could be a burden.
The beautiful young man was silent for a while and then looked up at Sunny with a sad smile.
Imagine hearing the person who is the most important to you in the whole wide world telling you that they love you, only to realize that they don't. Imagine listening to your friend's words of encouragement, only to understand that he secretly wishes for you to crash and burn.
He sighed.
Ignorance is bliss, Sonny. After returning from my first nightmare, I had to come to terms with the fact that most of the people in my life were not who I thought they were, and that what hid behind their smiles was ugly and vicious.
Kai gestured to himself and said,
Because of who I am and how I am, there was always a whirlpool of people around me. But after learning their true faces, I couldn't. Well, let's just say that if I had the choice, I would have preferred to stay blissfully blind to the truth forever.
He grew quiet. Sunny was speechless.
Damn,
he thought. Suddenly, Kai smiled.
But that's why I enjoy spending time with you so much, Sonny. No matter how bizarre the things you say are, they're always true. I never met anyone as stupidly honest as you. It's very refreshing.
Sunny shifted uncomfortably. Now he was kind of sorry for mocking the charming young man about his flaw. Perhaps it would be useful to someone like Sunny, but to a person like Kai, who always attracted the worst kind of attention from people, it could really be incredibly painful. The spell knew what it was doing. It always hits you in your most vulnerable spot.
Damned spell. The being that weaved it must have been the worst kind of a sick bastard. Sure.
A somber and slightly awkward energy hung in the air. Kai had just bared his soul and the details of his flaw to the whole group. Sunny shifted awkwardly. He hadn't realized how heavy such a flaw could be. One day, Kai would inevitably learn that Sunny was not as honest of a person as he considered him to be. But until then, having the naive archer believe in this ridiculous notion was rather beneficial. Turning away with a bit of awkwardness, Sunny glanced at Castor and called,
Next.
The proud legacy was looking at Kai with a heavy expression. Hearing Sunny's voice, he lingered for a moment and then shook his head. It seemed that Castor did not want to play his game. Sunny was also suddenly painfully aware that between the 6 of them, 4 people had openly shared their flaws with the rest, be it out of necessity or because of trust. Only 2 had not. One of the 2 was Sunny, and the other one was Castor. Sunny knew why he was hiding his flaw from everyone, but what was the proud scion's reason? It sort of went against his whole honorable and dependable persona. With how devoted he acted toward Nephis in the cohort, it was strange to see him keeping secrets. Was his reason the same as Sunny's? A dire vulnerability that the flaw would uncover? Or was there some other reason? Maybe he didn't trust the members of the cohort as much as he tried to make them think he did. And if so, why? With a shrug, Sunny left Castor alone. There was no point in lingering on these thoughts now. Until he had more information, any conclusion he could make would be useless anyway. Looking at Cassia, he smiled and said,
Hey Cass, want to give it a try?
The blind girl hesitated for a bit and then slowly approached him. While she was walking over, Sunny couldn't help but think back to a conversation he had with her in the distant past. Back then, Cassia had told him that knowledge could be the heaviest thing in the world. The burden of her flaw while completely different from Kai's, was at the same time eerily similar. They both longed for the bliss of ignorance, but were doomed to always bear the crushing weight of unwanted knowledge. When Sunny thought about it, he found that all members of the cohort were connected by invisible strings. Many things about them were like reflections, simultaneously the same, but also completely opposite. Like the fact that he could tell no lie, while Kai could not be lied to, or the fact that Nephis was like sunlight, while he was made of shadows. Cassia could not see, while he basically had two pairs of eyes. Changing Star dreamed of destroying the nightmare spell, but Effie dreamed of making it her paradise. Were these the strings of fate? Or was he just making empty connections because that was what humans were prone to do? The connection seemed too perfect for that. Almost fated. Come to think of it, only Castor didn't seem to be connected to any of them in any kind of meaningful way. What was that all about? Cassia sat down near Sunny, pulling him out of his thoughts. He forced a smile.
Right. Just like I said, the roles might have switched. So, what is your question?
Cassia smiled and gestured to the shadow.
My question is, if I were to ask Sunny which one of you has the treasure, what would he say?
Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then gave the ordinary stone a mental command to speak one of the answers that he had whispered to it in advance. In the same comically deep voice, the shadow seemed to speak.
The shadow has it.
Cassia nodded and turned to Sunny with subtle glee on her exquisite doll-like face.
Sunny, you have the treasure. Give.
With that, she expectantly outstretched her hand. With a disappointed sigh, Sunny put the ascended soul shard in her palm and said in a listless voice,
Congratulations, you've won. Great job. Yay.
Cassia grasped the shard and giggled. Meanwhile, Effie leaned forward with a bewildered look.
What? That's it?
She stared at the blind girl in astonishment and then asked,
How the hell did you do it?
Cassia smiled and crushed the shard in her small fist, absorbing the soul essence. Then she shook her head and said,
It wasn't that complicated. No matter who you ask about the other person's answer, the answer will always be the opposite of the correct one. That's because the awakened would have to tell the truth about the lie, while the devil would have to tell a lie about the truth. Do you understand?
Effie thought about it for a moment, then shook her head.
Nope. All the words you said seem to be familiar, but I don't understand crap. What do you even mean?
Cassia laughed.
Well, you should think about it in your free time. Or, just beat Sunny up the next time he decides to tease you with such riddles.
With that, she went away quite happy with herself. Sunny watched her go with his mouth wide open. He wondered at her.
Did she really just say that?
He knew Cassia was smart and had access to more knowledge than he could ever even fathom, but that was impressive. It was done on seemingly pure logic and assessment. Cassia may not be able to see with her eyes, but what she could process was impressive and a bit scary. Meanwhile, the perplexed huntress was staring at Sunny with a deep frown.
Yeah, I might just do that the next time.
He paled.
What's up with that? This was an honest competition. Don't be a sore loser.
Effie grinned menacingly.
Sore? Let's see which one of us will be sore when I'm done with you.
Sunny gaped at her, lost in his thoughts.
What kind of soreness does she mean, I wonder? Wait, no. Why would I wonder about that?
Standing up, Sunny glanced at Effie and scoffed.
Who's going to be done with who? Don't flatter yourself, beanpole.
With that, he walked away with contempt clearly written all over his face. His pace, however, was suspiciously hurried. A while later, the day was drawing to a close. Some of the memories had already restored themselves, so almost everyone was wearing their clothes and armor, which, as far as Sunny was concerned, was a real shame. Though the growing boredom was creeping in, he bemoaned the end of their long rest. When would they have a chance to rest like this again? However, something else distracted his full attention. At the far end of the marble arch, Nephis and Castor were standing facing each other with sharp swords in their hands. Their faces were stern. Sunny crept closer. It looked like two of his companions were about to clash. Back when Nephis was teaching Sunny how to use the sword, he had never been good enough to be her sparring partner. Once he learned enough to be of any use in a training fight, their fragile alliance had already broken and shattered to pieces. So apart from that short altercation on the somber slopes of the Ashen Barrow, they had never actually crossed swords with each other. Now, it seemed, Changing Star had found a reliable sparring partner. Castor had not only replaced Sunny as her right-hand man, but also filled the roles that Sunny had been either reluctant or unfit to take on. And it turned out that's what Castor and Nephis were doing. They weren't fighting, they were only sparring. Sunny felt a pang of jealousy spike in his chest. He shook his head in an attempt to shake it off.
Well, good for them,
he muttered softly to himself. Once the memories of the cohort were close to being fully restored, Nephis and Castor moved to the far end of the White Arch to practice. Now they were standing opposite each other, ready to begin. Although no one called him over, Sunny approached the two legacies and sat down, ready to enjoy the spectacle. He was keenly interested in observing these two immensely skilled swordsmen in action. Both of them had been trained for combat from the day they could walk. He reasoned that watching them would surely be helpful in his understanding of battle styles and techniques. That seemed to help keep his jealousy at bay, at least enough to enjoy the show. Not to mention that he was very interested to see the rematch between Nephis and Castor. The last time he saw them fight, Changing Star had lost, but not by much. Nephis also, back then, had held back her aspect ability at that time, but he doubted that that would change today. Neph's flame could be used both to heal and annihilate, but sadly, not to train. Castor glanced at him and frowned with visible displeasure. Was he irritated because Sunny was about to learn a thing or two about his technique, or because Sunny was ruining his alone time with Nephis? Sunny bitterly thought, "Either way, I don't care." Castor asked, "What are you doing?" Sunny shrugged. "Watching. Why? Does this part of the arch belong to your clan or something?" The proud legacy rolled his eyes, shook his head, and turned away. "Do as you wish." Nephis glanced at Sunny and didn't say anything. However, he could tell that she didn't mind. In fact, it was almost as if she was approving of his decision. He noticed a slight curve in her lips. It was almost a smile. Almost. Without wasting any more time, the two of them clashed in a whirlwind of steel, moving with the kind of speed that made it difficult for Sunny to follow along. The clangor of swords filled the air. A bit stunned, he stared at the furious fight with a blank expression. Damn! After the months of hunting monsters in the Dark City and his lessons with the Stone Saint, Sunny thought that he had developed his skill a lot, and he did. It's just that compared to Nephis and Castor, he was still so far behind that it was nothing short of disheartening. Before, he had sometimes entertained the thought of maybe being able to stand against them. Well, at least one of them, on equal ground. But now, this illusion was ruthlessly broken. If things went south and he ended up on the opposite sides of the barricades with Castor, facing him would be tantamount to committing suicide. For now, at least. Which of course simply meant that instead of facing him, Sunny would have to stab him in the back. Duly noted. He wasn't going to take on an enemy of this caliber in a forthright manner anyway. What was he, a fool? Concentrating on the fight, Sonny watched attentively. With the benefit of his new experience, he was able to discern and learn more from how these two experts moved and acted. Sometimes, he was even able to predict what they were going to do next. However, as time passed, a subtle frown appeared on his face.
What is she doing? That doesn't make any sense.
Sonny had been able to notice two unexpected things from how Nephis fought against Castor. The first one was rather easy to spot. While Castor did not use the full extent of his incredible speed, he did use a fair share of it, making it almost impossible for Nephis to win any of their matches. She lost much more than she won, almost always by a few fractions of a second, which was seemingly not conducive to training at all. What was the point of training if one of the participants had almost no chance of winning because of how large the gap between them and their opponent was? There was a reason why Nephis had never used Sonny as a sparring partner in the past, after all. But then, with a bit of amusement, he realized that Changing Star was doing exactly what he had done with the Stone Saint. She was tempering herself against an overwhelming force. That's why she had instructed Castor to use just enough of his aspect ability to always be much faster than her. Losing in a fight against a superior opponent was truly the best way to learn. Sonny smirked.
Ha! So I was right in my approach after all.
If Changing Star was doing the same, he had to be right. The second thing he had noticed, however, was a bit more perplexing. It was that Nephis was not using her usual flowing and unpredictable battle style. Instead, she was moving with precise and firm elegance, hiding behind a carefully woven wall of defense and patiently waiting for an opening to appear, instead of creating one herself. While intricate and impressive, this style was still a bit lacking in comparison to her real one. What's more, while it was deliberate and dependable, it was also rigid. If there was one thing that Nephis would never tolerate in her battle art, it was rigidity. Her whole worldview was built around the idea that nothing had more value than adaptability. That's why the style she had taught Sonny suited her so well. It was designed to be the epitome of changeability. So the question was, why the hell she was using something so alien to her against Castor? The answer might have been the obvious one. Either Nephis was trying to experiment with something new in an effort to adopt elements of this style into her own, which didn't seem very likely, or she didn't want Castor to know her true combat style too well, for some reason. But what could that reason be? Did she suspect his reasons for joining her weren't honorable? Did she trust him at all? Sonny didn't know much about the internal squabbles or power dynamics of the Legacy clans, but maybe it was more than that. Sonny rubbed his chin.
Interesting.
Did Nephis not trust Castor for some reason? Sonny surely did not, and to be entirely honest, he didn't even need any reason to do so. His intuition and general paranoia were enough. But Changing Star was different. He had learned a bitter lesson and now knew that everything she did had a firm logic behind it, even if that logic was entirely different from that of a normal person. So if Nephis was hiding her true battle style from Castor, there must have been a reason for it. But it didn't make any sense. At least not on the surface. From everything else that she had done, he was her most trusted lieutenant. Changing Star entrusted more to Castor than she ever had to anyone else. Castor himself also had never acted against Nephis's interests. In fact, he was even a bit too loyal. The bastard was always near Nephis, as though glued to her side. He also didn't seem to like it when others got too close to her. In that regard, he was almost like that flying rapier of Cassia's. During their entire day on the Marble Arch, the unfriendly Echo somehow always managed to remain between the blind girl and any man who tried to approach her for whatever reason. The message it was sending was quite clear. I'm watching you. It was a bit amusing to Sonny. It was like watching a loyal dog following his master, protecting its master. Sonny shook his head. The dynamic of Changing Star's relationship with Castor was really weird, but once again, he didn't have enough information to make any conclusions. All he could do was keep his eyes open and try to sleep with one of them open when the handsome Legacy was on watch duty. Maybe it was some strange legacy thing, like guarding the secrets of the clan against the prying eyes of other clans. Or was it more than that? How close were their families before either of them ended up in the dream realm? Who knew? Certainly Sonny did not, and he had a feeling the others didn't either. Though the others didn't even seem to bat an eye at Nephis and Castor's dynamic. Sonny shifted with discomfort. Then glancing at the fighting swordsman, Sonny suddenly got an idea. After considering it for a bit, he looked at them again. This time, his eyes were burning. He thought, that actually might work. The problem with his own technique at the moment was that it lacked true individuality. Sonny knew that there was a secret hiding inside his shadow that could become the foundation of his own unique battle style, but he had not cracked it yet. He just couldn't understand what that secret was. His progress at deciphering it had stalled. While training, Sonny had trouble keeping his eyes both on the Stone Saint and on the shadow. Whenever he tried, the taciturn knight would inevitably send him into a sea of pain. But even if he managed it somehow, there was an invisible wall standing between him and anything even remotely resembling understanding. He was in dire need of a breakthrough. So, what if his shadows tried to imitate someone else instead of him? And not just someone, but a real sword expert in the middle of a fight. Not only would Sonny be able to observe every tiny detail of its movements, but there would also be something to compare them against. Maybe that would reveal some sense of movement, or at least some pattern he could use to figure it out. The shadow was a part of him after all. It was hard to tell where Sonny ended and the shadow began. That's why the difference in how it moved and how he moved was almost imperceptible. But if it followed someone else, he would be able to separate the cadence and pattern of that person's movements from the shadows by contrasting it against his own. This had to work, or at least it was worth a try. Burning with anticipation, Sonny waited for Nephis and Castor to take a short break and then send the shadow over to the handsome Legacy. Leisurely strolling over the white marble, the shadow approached Castor and brazenly glued itself to his feet. Then it crossed its arms and glared at the Legacy with almost palpable disdain. Castor stared at the shadow for a couple of seconds and then raised his head to look at Sonny. There was a very strange expression on his face. What are you doing?" His voice didn't sound happy at all. Sonny shrugged with a carefree smile. "Oh, don't mind him. This cretin just lost me an ascended soul shard. As a form of punishment, I've decided to make him your shadow for a bit. So, just do your thing and don't worry about it." The shadow turned its head and pierced him with a menacing look. Sonny could practically hear its thoughts. "Who are you calling a cretin? You're the cretin here." That had to be it. Did I guess right? Huh? Oh, sorry, I forgot. You cannot answer. Not paying the offended shadow any more attention, he just smiled wider. Castor frowned, hesitated for a few moments, and then said through gritted teeth, "I would prefer if you wouldn't. You didn't even ask first." Sonny sighed. All right, whatever." With that, he gave the shadow the command to leave the proud Legacy alone. It separated itself from Castor and pretended to wipe its legs in disgust. Castor glared at it before turning back to his sword, readying himself for battle. The shadow sauntered over to Nephis, only to get attached to her feet, with visible delight. It even bowed gallantly to her shadow and made sure not to get in its way. Sonny grimaced.
What is this moron doing?
Of course, Sunny had ordered the shadow to approach Nephis, but he didn't expect it to be so visibly pleased by it. It was as if the shadow was simply beyond itself to finally follow someone competent. Sunny glared at it. "You traitor." Nephis looked down on the shadow, smiled, and didn't say anything. Sunny bit his lip, watching the legacies prepare to square off once more.
"Well, good. Now fight!"
The two legacies did not make him wait long. A few moments later, they were once again locked in a furious battle, only this time, two shadows were following Nephis. Both of them loyally imitated her movements. However, one of them was slightly, almost imperceptibly, different. Sunny looked at it with an intensity that threatened to burn two holes in the white marble. Soon, his eyes widened.
I see it. I think I see it."
There, in the tiniest difference between the way Changing Star's own shadow moved and the way his shadow moved, he finally saw it. He had found his breakthrough. Observing the motions of the two shadows that followed Nephis, Sunny was finally able to understand the foundation of the elusive shadow style. Before, he only sensed a hint of its essence. He knew that just like the shadow, the hidden battle art was insidious, shapeless, and ever-changing. But this was where lay the problem. A battle style was, by definition, a structured framework of patterns and principles, a doctrine that dictated how one should act to defeat an enemy. The doctrine was used as a foundation and expanded into a variety of specific movements to create a style. But if something didn't have a shape and its form was constantly changing, how could it ever be stable and structured? Sunny had no idea how the concepts he felt were at the core of the shadow style could create something even remotely applicable to practice. Insidious, shapeless, ever-changing. What was he supposed to do with that? But now he understood. The key to it all was so simple and evident that he almost laughed. Why had he not guessed it earlier? It was so obvious. The idea that tied everything together was as innate to the nature of shadows as formlessness and elusiveness. It was imitation. After all, what were the two things that came to mind when one thought about shadows? That they lived in the dark and imitated the things that hid them from light. The foundation of the shadow style was indeed insidious, shapeless, and ever-changing. Its core concept was to steal that which made the enemy strong and use it to destroy them. To master that style, he had to learn how to behave like a shadow. Sunny stared at Nephis and Castor, but didn't see them. His mind was consumed completely by the sudden revelation. He had no time to pay attention to their fight anymore. This style had endless potential. If he managed to master it, he could be able to counter any style or technique used against him, not to mention become an immensely unpredictable opponent. What could be more unpredictable than a formless shadow? Of course, it was easier said than done. To begin with, while the ability to imitate the enemy was incredibly powerful, it also demanded an incredible amount of talent, experience, and insight from the user. You couldn't imitate that which you didn't understand, after all. More importantly, this was just the foundation of the style. He still had to expand it into the actual collection of specific principles and retrain himself accordingly. It was a mammoth task. Creating a complete style from scratch could take a true battle master years, if not decades. Sunny had not even scratched the surface of this ambitious undertaking. However, that was all right. It was a start. Personal battle arts were not created in an instant. It was a long and arduous process, with endless iterations coming and going while being tempered by the crucible of combat. After all, it's not like the style would be useless until it became perfect. Sunny just had to get to the point where it could be applied in battle in one form or another. That alone would tremendously enhance his technique. He smiled, congratulating himself. However, the next moment, a deep scowl appeared on his face.
But how exactly am I supposed to do that?
A while later, when the sun was already touching the western horizon, Sunny was sitting by himself and staring at his shadow. He was motionless like a statue and deep in thought. On his face, there was a troubled frown. When someone approached him, Sunny lingered for a few moments and then slowly looked up to see who was disturbing him. To his surprise, it was Nephis. The leader of their cohort stood there for a bit, her graceful figure illuminated by the setting sun. Then, she sat down next to him. Sunny blinked.
Hey, Neph.
Nephis gave him a nod. Hey, Sunny. He waited for a few moments and then asked,
Did you want something?
The corner of her mouth slightly curled upward. With a sigh, Changing Star glanced at him and said, It's nothing much. I just wanted to say that I saw you fighting in the catacombs. You've improved a lot in these 3 months. Well done.
Sunny smiled. That. Well, it's not like there's a lot of opportunities to lead a peaceful life in the Dark City. I was bound to improve a little, no?
She shook her head. Don't sell yourself short. You really did well. Very few would have been able to grow so much and as fast as you, especially without a teacher. After hesitating for a while, Sunny shrugged.
You said it yourself. One real battle is worth more than 1,000 hours of training. There was a lot of battles in those 3 months.
Nephis nodded and then asked, That firm and grounded style you weaved into your technique, where did it come from? He scratched the back of his head, remembering the hellish training sessions with his pet monster, held back the urge to shiver.
I just observed how the Stone Saint fought and tried to replicate it.
Changing Star smiled. As I thought, I've seen her fight too. It's a very formidable echo, one of the finest I've ever seen. Coming from a legacy, this meant a lot. Sunny was indeed really lucky to be in the right place at the right time to get the echo of the Stone Saint. If the fallen siblings of the Iron Spiders had not brought her to the brink of death, he would never have been able to survive a battle with the living statue, let alone defeat her. He was even luckier to have a divine aspect that allowed him to turn echoes into creatures that were even more fearsome. All in all, Sunny was extremely fortunate. His fortune was exactly as incredible as his misfortune. He grinned.
You know my attributes. I do get lucky a lot.
She lingered for a few moments and then said, I'm glad that you were able to understand the true design of the battle style I taught you. So he was right on this point too. The style Changing Star had given him was indeed designed to be as adaptable as possible and seamlessly incorporate elements of other styles. It was a perfect foundational battle art. For those talented enough to make use of it, of course. Which were, most likely, extremely few and far between. Sunny glanced at Nephis and, after some deliberation, asked, That style of yours is truly unique. Where did it come from? He had been too inexperienced to realize this at the time, but what Neph had taught him could have been considered a rare treasure. The style he took for granted was, in fact, a work of pure genius. It deserved to be famous and ubiquitous, but it was not, which suggested that this treasure was a secret one. Changing Star lingered for a bit and then said, It's a part of my inheritance. Sunny coughed. That was unexpected. He blinked and stared at her, stunned.
Then why the hell did she teach it to me?
Sonny stared at Nephis with a complicated expression. After a while, he managed to speak again.
Why did you entrust me with something so precious?
She glanced at him, lingered for a few moments, then shrugged. We had a deal, remember? My knowledge in exchange for your share of the spoils we earn. There had indeed existed such a deal. However, he had not exactly acted in good faith when proposing it. After all, he had no use for those spoils in the first place. At the time, he thought himself incredibly clever, but now that he realized the value of what Nephis shared, he felt almost guilty. Sonny scowled. If Changing Star realized that she had revealed a family secret to him because of a lie, she had a valid reason to be resentful of him, just like he was of her. With a dark smile, he looked away.
You must have realized by now that I've cheated you in that deal.
Nephis turned to him and said, her voice calm and even, You mean the fact that you don't need to absorb Soul Shard to grow stronger? Sonny froze for a moment, then gave her a nod.
You don't seem very surprised.
Figures. When Sonny first learned about this ability of his, he was stunned. But Nephis seemed to know a lot more about the dream realm and its oddities than a normal person did. She didn't even try to pretend otherwise. It's a very rare aspect trait, but not unheard of among the upper echelons of the awakened. I am capable of something like that myself, although your case does seem to be especially unique. Sonny glanced at her.
How so?
Changing Star remained silent for a few moments, and then said, her voice hinted with a bit of wonder. Usually, when an awakened absorbs the soul essence directly, the process leaves the remnants of the soul core empty. But when you do it, the shards are left brimming with it. This is very unusual. He shifted uncomfortably and then cleared his throat.
Yeah, well, you have your share of secrets too, Neph. Don't think that I didn't notice. Lineage memories, domains.
Nephis interrupted him with a heavy gaze. When Sonny fell silent and looked at her with a frown, she said in a strangely somber tone, Never say those words aloud again, Sonny. I am serious. Just knowing them might get you killed. He stared at her for a long time and then scoffed.
No problem. Since you showed me the courtesy of not prying into my secrets, I won't pry into yours. I didn't really want to know anyway. The mysterious upper echelons you mentioned can play their dirty little games all they want, as long as they leave me out of them.
Sonny took a deep breath and frowned.
But there is one question I have to ask you, because it involves me personally.
She raised an eyebrow. Her voice was dry. Sure, ask away. He grimaced.
Why are you hiding the true core of your technique from Castor?
Changing Star looked at him for a bit, and then smiled. So, you've noticed? That's good too. Yes, I've been using a different style when facing Castor. Sonny looked at her with a humorless expression.
Why?
She shrugged. Why do you incorporate elements of the Stone Saint's technique into your own? He shook his head.
To become stronger. Also, nice try at misdirection, but I won't fall for your tricks. I'm the one who taught them to you, remember? So just stop. Answer my question.
Nephis sighed and turned away, glancing at the silhouette of the crimson spire that loomed in the distance. A shiver ran through her body. I'll answer you when we return to the Dark City. It won't change anything until then anyway. Your safety won't be compromised in any way. Sonny squinted in confusion. He thought they were having a moment of connection and friendship, but apparently Nephis was still playing games. Sonny wondered,
My safety won't be compromised. What is that supposed to mean?
As he glared at her, Changing Star stood up and turned to leave. Before that, however, she lingered for a moment. Keep sharpening your sword, Sonny. I expect big things from you. With that, she walked away, leaving him speechless.
And what does she mean by that?
After Nephis left, Sonny returned to staring at his shadow. He had figured out the essence and foundation of the elusive battle art that hid inside it, but he had no idea how to go about creating an actual style out of them. He did not have enough experience and mastery to be able to create something out of nothing. It was a dead end.
Curses! Why even hide that damn mystery inside the aspect if I can't do anything with it?
Perhaps in the distant future he would be able to, but right now it was as though he had found the door, but was not strong enough to turn the key and unlock it. It just stood there and teased him endlessly, just like the damned gateway inside the Crimson Spire. It was pure torture. Sonny sighed.
Maybe I wasn't supposed to notice the existence of the hidden style so soon.
But he had noticed, and he worked so hard to gain insight into its secrets. Was it all for nothing? All the pain, all the effort? Why would Spell make him work so hard only to refuse him a reward? Sonny felt stupid for even asking that. The nightmare spell was no better than a plague. It pretended to be fair, but none of this was just. It was random and cruel. With a bitter sigh, Sonny turned away and tried to forget all about the shadow techniques and battle styles. It was almost dark anyway. Sonny sighed.
I might as well get some sleep.
Walking over to the center of the marble arch, Sonny laid down beside the other members of the cohort and tiredly closed his eyes. The beach vacation was over. It was funny, visually stunning, and unexpectedly emotional, but ended on a bitter note. Tomorrow was going to be another long day.
To hell with this.
Exhausted by all of it, he fell asleep before even finishing the thought. A few hours later, Sonny opened his eyes and looked around in confusion. The world was enveloped in a strange, dim twilight. Deep shadows surrounded him, shrouding the tall walls that were cut from black marble. Looking between the mighty columns, Sonny saw the black circle of the sun burning in the lightless sky. Sonny furrowed his brow.
Is that an eclipse?
As the sleep left Sonny's mind, he realized just how much was wrong with this picture. The cohort was sleeping on top of the white arch, so why was he seeing walls and columns? Had they somehow moved in his sleep? Was the entire world shifting around them? What was happening? Suddenly, a woman's scream tore the silence like a sharp knife. It was full of pain and suffering. Sonny tried to summon the Midnight Shard into his hand, only to realize that he had no hands. Then, something else resounded from the darkness. A baby's cry. Things were strange, and getting stranger by the second. There was only one possible explanation for this. Sonny was dreaming. It would normally be a relief, only they were in the dream realm. People were not supposed to dream in the dream realm. Sonny had no idea what that meant, but it could not have been good. When Sonny realized that he was dreaming, the first thing that came to his mind was that there was another soul tree growing somewhere near the White Arch. However, after a few moments of panic, he quickly dismissed this idea. After all, he had never actually dreamt while under the mind hex of the ancient fiend. He had just mistaken the broken memories of his conversation with Cassia for a dream. But this dream, this one was real. The dreamscape that surrounded Sonny was ephemeral, shifting, and shrouded in shadows. Above him, the sun was like a circle of darkness, with crimson light drowning in a burning sea of clouds. However, none of that light reached him. In the shadowy hall of black marble, there was nothing but empty silence, which was now destroyed by the sound of a baby crying, of course. The woman's screams had long grown silent. Peering into the Stygian depths of the dark marble hall, Sonny saw nothing but endless shadows. The baby's cries were coming from somewhere beyond them, or from within them. A subtle thought entered Sonny's mind. The monumental walls, the colossal columns, the grandiose hall, all of it looked strangely familiar, as though he had already been here once, a long time ago. All that was missing were the signs of desolation and a large altar cut from a single block of black marble. In fact, it should have been standing right where the crying sounds were coming from. Familiar words appeared in his mind, now full of new meaning. Child of Shadows. In the next moment, everything disappeared. The world was swaying. A seemingly endless surface of black stone was flowing past his vision, moving up and down. No, it wasn't stone, but Sonny himself. He was the one swaying. In fact, Sonny found himself in the body of a toddler. He was currently held gently by a young woman who was walking down a long stone corridor, which was dimly lit by burning torches, hence the swaying. The girl was very young, not older than Sonny himself. His actual body, that is. She was slender and exquisitely beautiful, with soft porcelain skin and long raven hair. The lissome beauty was dressed in a flowing silk tunic that left her delicate neck and shoulders exposed. The image of a black serpent was coiled around her arms and neck, its scales so intricately tattooed that sometimes it seemed as though the creature was moving. Whoever marked the girl's skin with this image was a true genius of their craft. Sonny had never seen anything like it in the real world. However, he had seen similar markings in his first nightmare. This was the mark of a slave who belonged to the Shadow God. The young girl was a temple slave, just like Sonny had been in his first nightmare. The serpent coiled around her neck and arms served both as her collar and her shackles. Sonny wasn't sure how he knew, but he was certain this young woman was also the toddler's mother. Sonny could feel the love radiating off her as she held the child. A quiet smile appeared on her face every time she looked at him. Sonny might have lost his own mother at a young age, but he still remembered what love looked like at least. Sonny tried to work through the meaning of this.
If the mother is a slave, then the child is too.
Finally, Sonny began to understand what was happening to him. The dream he found himself in did not belong to him. Instead, it belonged to the nameless temple slave whose role he had assumed during the first nightmare, the original Child of Shadows. This wasn't a dream. It was a memory somehow inherited during the first nightmare. But why was it dormant until now? Sonny turned his attention back to the dream, hoping to find some new clue. Soon, the young girl entered a vast hall that was shrouded in darkness. Judging by the black marble walls, they were in another part of the ancient temple. Sonny couldn't see much of his surroundings, but he could somehow tell that they were underground. In the center of the hall, 7 tall braziers were burning with strange pale flames. On the edges of light, motionless, stood a dozen or so people. Sonny shivered, suddenly reminded of the silent shadows populating his soul sea. However, these were not ghosts, but humans. There were several other slaves, while the rest appeared to be priests. To tell the truth, there was not a lot of difference between them. It seemed as though the servants of the Shadow God did not pursue opulence and status. In fact, many of the priests bore the same markings as the slaves, suggesting that they themselves had belonged to the temple once. Unfortunately, from the vantage point of the baby, Sunny didn't exactly have a prime view of what was happening. The young slave woman approached the elder slaves and passed her child into her arms. Separated from the warmth of his mother's chest, the toddler, and therefore Sunny, felt cold and scared. However, the older woman consoled him with gentle words, preventing the child from crying. Then, she moved back to stand with the rest of the people gathered in the underground hall. Their faces were calm and solemn. The young woman, meanwhile, slowly walked into the circle of light. Her movements were elegant, flowing, and graceful. Stopping at the very center, she stood motionlessly between the 7 pale flames, surrounded by 7 shadows. Sunny stared at the beautiful slave, feeling that something important was about to happen. But what? As he became pensive and uneasy, a sudden sound broke the silence. It was the deep and reverberating ringing of a zither. As the musical instrument sang, the slave girl suddenly moved. As she did, her 7 shadows moved with her. With his eyes wide open, an awed Sunny watched the young woman. The beautiful slave danced in the circle of light, surrounded by impenetrable darkness, her every move full of indescribable grace and clear but elusive purpose. Her young body was flexible and lithe, but also strong and trained as much as a warrior's. Her skill as a dancer was like that of a battle master. It was mesmerizing. The young woman weaved a beautiful pattern with her movements, their cadence and nature simultaneously firm and flowing, sharp and gentle, clear and unpredictable. She danced alone, but also with 7 partners, effortlessly controlling both her own body and the 7 shadows cast by it. At times, it was hard to tell which one of them was real. Her dance was insidious, shapeless, and ever-changing. Sunny's heart beat faster. He recognized these movements. They were the same as how the shadow moved. This was the source and origin of the battle style he wanted to create. This was Shadow Dance. The grand arch of white marble was exactly the same as when he had last seen it. The sun was already climbing the great dome of the sky, chasing the remnants of the dark sea away. The rest of the cohort had woken up some time ago and were now preparing for the journey ahead. He had overslept. However, it didn't matter. With eyes burning with excitement, Sunny sat up and recalled everything that he had witnessed in his dream. The memories were still there, clear as day. He could recall every moment, every step, every breath of the dance that the beautiful slave had performed. The woman had been the mother of the nameless slave Sunny inhabited in the first nightmare. Sunny felt some type of connection to this long-dead stranger. Though he knew it was all superficial, his eyes dimmed slightly. That dream of his, well, a precious gift, was also a source of numerous questions. Now that he was awake, Sunny was able to see a few things with more clarity. The scene that he had witnessed at the very beginning of it was that of the nameless slave's, the original child of shadows, birth. He was born during a solar eclipse, not unlike Sunny. That fact put a lot of things into perspective. Everyone knew that the spell did not choose the role an aspirant would play during their first nightmare randomly. That was apparent from the fact that the bodies they inhabited in it, while different, were very close to their real ones. However, the actual principle of how the spell chose the roles and the events of the first nightmare were largely unclear. But now, Sunny knew that he shared more than simply outer appearance with the temple slave whose body he inhabited for a few short days. Both of them were born in similar, extremely rare circumstances. Both of them were at the very bottom of society, oppressed and unwanted. surviving against all odds instead of because of them. Both of them were left without a family at a young age. The tough life in the outskirts took Sonny's parents and sister away. To the nameless slave, it was the servants of the mighty war god that destroyed his childhood home and life. Sonny didn't know what happened to the beautiful dancer after that last temple of shadows was destroyed by them, but he doubted that it was anything good. With a heavy sigh, he looked down. It was fate. What he shared with the temple slave was a similarity of fate. Sonny was growing more and more convinced that the nightmare spell was connected to the strings of fate in some way. Perhaps it was weaved from them. Remembering the void he had found himself in after completing his first trial, Sonny looked into the distance with wonder. That void was filled with a myriad of stars that served as nexuses for an inconceivably complex net made of countless strings of silver light. Were those the strings of fate? He shook his head. Whatever they were, and whatever the spell was, it was not something he could know or understand. Yet. Numerous people, most of them better informed and smarter than him, had tried and failed. It was wiser to concentrate on something within his reach, the shadow dance. Sonny smiled. He wasn't so engrossed by the dancing of the beautiful slave girl because it was truly stunning and enchanting. He was riveted beyond belief by it because he recognized the pattern of the battle style hiding in his shadow in her graceful movements. Turns out it wasn't a battle art at all. It was a dance. But was there a difference? Not in this case. Not really. It wasn't a coincidence that people often described the way true masters of battle fought as dancing. At their core, fighting and dancing were very close. That's why combat, when brought to a truly impressive level, was like a dance. So why couldn't a dance, when mastered to perfection, be like a battle art? Sonny was certain that he was right. He had already comprehended the essence of shadow dance and gained insight into its foundation. With the memory of the beautiful dancer moving as one with her 7 shadows, he now had the last piece of the puzzle. The actual set of moves and principles that he could use to create an actual battle style in their image. He didn't have the battle art yet, but he did now possess all the components needed to create it. Of course, it was not going to be easy. Even with all that knowledge stored in his mind, he would still have to spend a lot of time and effort and spill a lot of blood, both his own and that of his enemies, to turn the graceful dance of the beautiful slave girl into a deadly dance of steel. It wasn't even certain that he would succeed, but Sonny would be damned if he wasn't going to try. Shadow dance would become his personal battle art. He was going to make it happen. As if echoing his last thought, the familiar voice of the spell suddenly whispered into his ear.
You have received an aspect legacy, Shadow Dance.
When Sonny heard the voice, his eyes widened. He couldn't believe what he'd heard. The spell normally only rewarded him after slaying an enemy. Was it possible to grow stronger simply by discovering information? Could you learn your way into an aspect? Sonny stared into the emptiness, stunned to his core by the enormity of this development. Not only was he just awarded an aspect, but an aspect legacy. Did the spell just use those words? He gulped. Aspect legacy was something that every aspect contained, but very few awakened ever received. Unlike the boons gained during a typical nightmare, or the rewards sleepers received after returning from the dream realm for the first time, each aspect legacy had a unique set of requirements that the owner of the aspect had to meet to unlock it. When they did, they were rewarded with a powerful relic. Usually, it was a memory that synergized perfectly with their aspect abilities, or sometimes even an echo. Legacy families weren't called that accidentally. While not every family possessed an aspect legacy, most of them did. In fact, it was the acquisition of the aspect legacy that laid the foundation for the creation of many of these powerful families. By now, some of the most powerful families even had several. But getting an aspect legacy was not an easy feat. Most of them were received by saints, followed by master, and only a few were won by mere awakened. Getting the aspect legacy while still being a sleeper was simply unheard of. Sonny smirked to himself. Just like getting a true name during the first nightmare was unheard of. Sonny couldn't believe his luck. Of course, he worked bitterly hard to be able to grasp it, and yet the magnitude of the harvest he reaped was utterly unbelievable. However, why was his aspect legacy not a memory, but a battle art? That was really strange. Not wasting any time, Sonny summoned the runes and hungrily searched for new ones. What he saw made him tremble. As Castor, Cassia, Nephis, Effie, and Kai shook off their sleep and prepared to get moving for the day, Sonny stood on the arch and pulled up his runes. Having just unlocked a legacy aspect, he needed to know more. Right there in the glimmering field of familiar runes, in the cluster describing his aspect, a new string of them appeared. Aspect, Shadow Slave. Aspect rank, Divine. Aspect abilities, Shadow Control. Aspect legacy, Shadow Dance. As soon as Sonny concentrated on the aspect legacy, new runes shined to describe it. Shadow Dance description. Once an elegant dance, now a deadly battle art. This mysterious style was created by the treacherous Lost from Light after witnessing a graceful slave dancing with her shadows. Who else could have taken something so beautiful and turned it into something so vile? Sonny coughed when he saw the description mentioned Lost from Light. That was his true name. Was the spell talking about him? Or had it assigned him the true name of some figure long past? Sonny's mind was racing through the possibilities and all their implications. If this is about me, that means I invented Shadow Dance. How can that be? Is this something that happened just this instant? Is that why I didn't have to defeat an enemy? And why is the spell calling me treacherous? I'm not that treacherous, okay? So what if I lie, manipulate, and backstab people all the time? That's just being smart. However, his attention soon shifted from the description itself and on to the glittering runes beneath it. Shadow Dance Mastery Level, 0 out of 7. First Relic, Unearned. Second Relic, Unearned. And the runes continued on and on all the way to Seventh Relic, Unearned. Each line of runes promises Sonny some sort of legacy relic once he achieves the corresponding level of mastery with his newly envisioned battle style. Not one, not even 2 or 3, but 7 possible relics just waiting to be unlocked. Whole legacy families were created around a single legacy relic. Sonny couldn't even imagine what he would be able to do with 7. If Sonny managed to fully unlock the potential of this legacy aspect, he'd be more powerful than all of the legacy families in the world. Consumed by avarice, Sonny looked at the rising sun with an excited grin. This was great. This was incredible. He could create his clan. No, that would mean putting all his eggs into one basket. Better create several clans. Though that sounded like a lot of work, Sonny sometimes had trouble navigating the politics of his own cohort. How would he run 7? As his pure greed faded away, Sonny tried to ground himself in reality. I would have to get back to the real world before I can build anything, and the odds are that's still not going to happen. Turning his head slightly, he stared at the distant silhouette of the crimson spire and lost himself in thought. Effie's voice brought him back to reality.
Hey doofus, breakfast is ready. Why are you spacing out and smiling like an idiot?
Sonny answered without thinking.
Just thinking about creating my own legacy family. Have you ever thought about creating one, Effie?
The robust huntress stared at him for a few seconds with a strange expression and then grinned.
Is that an invitation?
Still lost in thought, Sonny tilted his head and glanced at her astutely. He thought to himself,
honestly, if I was trying to start a strong family line, I could choose a far worse partner than Effie. She was a fearsome awakened with an extravagant aspect. She was powerful beyond belief. Plus, her physique is nothing short of divine. Any heir she gives birth to is bound to be both strong and gorgeous.
Blush rushed into Sonny's cheeks, and he did his best to ignore that line of thought.
What? No, not an invitation, just considering different futures.
At that moment, Sonny suddenly realized that he had been unceremoniously ogling Effie up and down for a better half of a minute, and that her grin had long turned dangerous at some point. The huntress stretched her neck and spoke with a tone of menace.
I see. So you have chosen death.
Sonny blinked.
No, wait, I didn't mean it like that. I was just, theorizing.
The unruly huntress smiled menacingly and cracked her knuckles.
Oh, so you were theorizing about me, huh? Do tell, do tell.
Panic rushed into Sonny's tone and he spoke in a ramble.
No, wait, I wasn't. I was just, you asked and you said something about breakfast?
Effie glared at him and he thought she would smash him flat into the ground. Luckily, she didn't. She teased him so often that Sonny wasn't even sure how much of this was genuine anger and part of her games. But he got the sense he had crossed the line. Without another word, Effie turned and trudged towards the fire where Cassia was preparing breakfast. Soon after that, the cohort left the grandiose marble arch and continued their journey into the depths of the labyrinth. Before the expedition started, Nephis had told him that they had a fast and comparatively safe way to reach the southern edges of the Forgotten Shore. As much as anything could be safe in this cursed place. Without it, getting to their destination would have taken them months. Now that they had left the Dark City, Sonny finally decided to satisfy his curiosity and asked what that mysterious method of traveling with incredible speed was. Nephis shrugged off his question.
We still have about a week's travel south before we're able to access it.
Sonny dug his heels in.
But that doesn't answer my question. What is this miraculous form of transit? How do you even know about it if it's something we can't access yet?
Cassia spoke up.
I learned about it from my visions. It will work. You don't have to worry.
Sonny sighed and shook his head. He looked around at the group, but no one else was willing to question Nephis. And the truth was, he couldn't turn around now even if he disliked her answer. In the end, he didn't even ask any further questions and just waved his hand dejectedly. There was no point. Plus, the expedition had shown itself to be extremely lucrative for him so far. Mere days after its start, he had already gotten plenty of shadow fragments and an ascended memory, not to mention making a breakthrough in his exploration of battle styles and earning an aspect legacy for his effort. And so the group soldiered on with Nephis at its head. She had a determined look in her eye.
I've reviewed the map of the Forgotten Shore and picked out some high spots that should allow us to shelter at night. But we have to keep pace.
To make sure that these shelters were really where the map showed and remove any possibility of ending up stranded in the middle of the labyrinth with no way to escape the Dark Sea, she had even employed Kai during the week that Sonny had spent with Effie. The charming archer scouted the way ahead and confirmed that her map was correct. Now, the only danger they faced from the Forgotten Shore itself was that of a sudden storm. However, with a true oracle in the ranks of the cohort, this danger was dramatically diminished. Now that Cassia had grown into her powers and absorbed a lot of soul essence, she was often able to warn them if something like that was going to happen. However, no oracle was foolproof, and there were also the usual perils of the labyrinth, of course. And as they went deeper into its deadly maze, the situation slowly began to turn from bad to worse. As Sunny, Nephis, Castor, Cassia, Kai, and Effie ventured deeper into the southern reaches of the Crimson Labyrinth, the situation slowly turned worse and worse. The iron spiders that had been not too threatening to the cohort of powerful, experienced Dark City hunters at the start of it all were growing more and more deadly with each step of the way. Their numbers grew exponentially, becoming a real danger pretty soon. More and more often, bigger and stronger monsters appeared at the head of the attacking beasts, bringing with them all sorts of problems. What's worse, the spiderweb they used to trap their prey was changing too. The metal wires from which it was weaved became so thin that it was at times almost impossible to notice it, and sharp enough to cut through armor and bone, while maintaining the resilience of superb steel. The whole labyrinth was covered in it, turning from crimson to dull gray. The cohort bled more because of the invisible webs than they did because of the spiders themselves. Of course, the iron spiders were cunning creatures too. More often than not, they only attacked once one of the humans was caught in their nets, leading to a few really harrowing experiences for the members of Changing Star's party. And there was a wide variety of other terrifying creatures waiting to ambush them in the twisting pathways of the Crimson Coral too. What made them so dangerous was that the cohort didn't know anything about their anatomy and abilities. Every fight was a gamble, often resulting in one or several of them sustaining serious wounds. There were three things that made the situation somewhat bearable. The first one was Nephis and her healing flames. Although using the aspect ability took a toll on their leader, it was often worth it, especially if one of the members of the cohort received wounds that limited their mobility. The torrent of black water that flooded the Forgotten Shore was far more dangerous than any nightmare creature that lived in the labyrinth. If a party member didn't reach safety in time, they'd be forced to grapple with the incomprehensible horrors that lurked in the depths. Thanks to Neph, they didn't have to worry about anyone slowing the cohort down. The second benefit, unexpectedly, was the iron spiders themselves. Because of the peculiar way they hunted, a lot of creatures found their deaths in the cunning embrace of the wire spiderwebs. Finding these eviscerated corpses or cocoons containing old carcasses became a common occurrence once the party invaded the depths of the spider territory. Thanks to that, 6 humans were able to study and anticipate many of the monsters they had to face in this region of the labyrinth. A lot of potentially deadly surprises had been avoided due to the cohort stumbling onto the corpses of similar creatures prior to fighting against a living one and spending some time learning about its strengths and weaknesses. The third reason was the blood arrow. In the hands of an experienced archer, it was almost as deadly as it would have been in the hands of an inexperienced one. The difference being that the latter would mostly be a danger to themselves, quickly turning into a bloodless husk. The first time Kai had used it, Sunny experienced a disturbing feeling of shock. That time, they were facing a large group of iron spiders led by a much larger arachnid, the awakened monster of their tribe, similar in status to a carapace centurion. These creatures were much heavier and more powerful, with thick plates of iron armor covering their bodies almost completely. Even Castor's enchanted sword had trouble cutting through their defenses. What's worse, due to the speed with which the wretched abominations moved, it was especially hard to catch them in a gap between the armor plates. Sunny was facing 2 smaller iron spiders at once, while the Stone Saint was butchering the third one. With his shadow observing what was happening behind his back, He didn't miss the moment when the cunning awakened monster suddenly disengaged from Nephis and dashed into his direction, its mandibles moving in anticipation of tasting human flesh. Calmly preparing to dodge, Sonny tensed his muscles and narrowed his eyes. Whistling over his shoulder, a menacing black arrow suddenly streaked through the air. Its shaft was made out of dark, polished wood, with black feathers for fletching and a vicious white arrowhead that seemed to be cut from pale white bone, like a sharp fang of some terrible creature. The arrow easily pierced the thick iron plate protecting the spider and tore deep into his body. Even though Kai messed up his shot a bit and hit the monster in its abdomen instead of the head, the results were nothing short of harrowing. In the next moment, the awakened monster suddenly slowed down and staggered. Then, it tried to lunge forward once again, but ended up losing its balance and weakly falling to the ground. Its limbs moved slightly, quickly losing any form of cohesion. Their movements grew slower and slower, and then stopped. Beneath the iron plates, the spider's body grew taut and shriveled, like that of a mummy. Soon, it seemed completely drained. Sonny blinked, shaken by this disturbing image, and couldn't help but glance briefly at his forearm. If not for the blood weave, he might have ended up as a shriveled corpse too. He would have gone through with cutting off his arm and survived, most likely. But if he had been a couple of seconds too late, Sonny shook his head and told himself it was better not to think about that grim possibility. He was glad that the blood arrow was on their side now. Not too far away from him, gliding through the air, Kai suddenly made a strange gasping sound. Sonny didn't know what it felt like to have your blood magically drained and then suddenly returned to your body, but he doubted that it was pleasant. Also, there was this question: if Kai's blood was used to create the arrow and then returned to him, if he had hit his mark, of course, then where did the blood drained from the prey go? He wasn't sure that he wanted to know. In any case, with Nightingale in possession of the morbid ascended memory, their battles with iron spiders and other inhabitants of the labyrinth became a bit less perilous. The blood arrow did not have any enchantments that needed to be activated by manipulating soul essence, so the charming archer could use it to its full potential. Although Sonny was still a bit bitter about having to give such a menacing weapon away, he was now more confident than ever that his decision was the right one. Just like that, 6 more days passed by. During this time, he didn't gain any new memories, but managed to accumulate 18 more shadow fragments, bringing his total to 340. He was still not as strong physically as he had been before creating the Shadow Saint, but getting closer and closer. In the evening of the 6th day, bloodied and exhausted, the cohort had finally approached the goal of the first leg of their expedition. Looking ahead, Sonny couldn't help but stop in his tracks. As far as he could tell, the place had every sign it might be a death trap. And yet, Nephis was strolling in undeterred. What was going on here?